Thank you. Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny and Performance Committee of Perth and Ross Council of Wednesday, the 31st of January 2024. Apologies for the slightly delayed start due to technical issues. I don't think we've had that before in Scrutiny and Performance Committee, so that's us looking towards the full house of committees now. My name's Councillor Colin Stewart. I'm the convener of the committee. I'm joined by Bailey Alistair Bailey, the vice convener by Miss Molly, the clerk, and by Lisa Simpson, the head of legal and governance services. I think we have two substitutions on the committee today, which are Bailey Ahern for substituting for Councillor Allen and Councillor Harvey substituting for Councillor Carr. Clark, are there any others? Just want to check if everybody's online.
Thanks, convener. For those joining us online, when I call out your name, could you please confirm you're present? Councillor Forbes.
Yes, good morning, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Frampton.
I'm here.
Councillor Harvey.
I'm here, I'm present.
And Councillor Robertson.
Present.
Thank you. All members are present, convener.
Thank you. With the committee's indulgence, the Executive Director Renton is here and will be available to answer questions on the extreme weather events item 7, but does have to leave for a personal appointment at 12. So would it be okay with the committee if we bring item 7 before item 6? Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest. Bailey Ahern.
Yeah, I've got a declaration of interest. Item 5.3 as a board member of Culture Perth and Kinross.
Thank you very much. Are there any other declarations of interest? Okay. Can we then agree? I move on to item 3, which is the. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, sorry, similar to the previous one, as a board member of Horsecross, I'll be 5.3. I've got a declaration of interest for that.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 then, the minutes. Can we agree the minute of the special meeting of Scrutiny and Performance Committee of 22nd of November 2023? Thank you. And can we agree the minute of the meeting of Scrutiny and Performance Committee of 11th of December 2023? Agreed. Thank you. We'll then move on to item 4, which is the outstanding business statement. Item 1, number 14 on the outstanding business statement was a briefing session for all members of the council on how the Health and Social Care Partnership operates, and that was held the week before last, so that's complete. Item 2, number 15 is to progress with discussions on additional sport needs provision in Perth and Kinross, and we're going to hold a further meeting to arrange that. And number 29 was a request for a breakdown in the 22-23 complaint figures to be shared with members, and that was issued by email to all members. Can we agree? Are there any questions on that?
Yeah, I've got a question on it. I don't see anything in there on the outstanding business with regards to the flooding. That was started at the last meeting. We're continuing today. I'm assuming we're going to get a report back to this committee, and I wonder if we're going to get the opportunity to speak to SEPA or Scottish Water at the same time. So that's going to remain an outstanding action until those reports and those agencies have had the opportunity to come to scrutiny.
Thanks, Bailey Ahern, and thanks for advance notice to the question as well. So I believe that officers have been in discussion with SEPA and SSE, and we will invite them to a future meeting, but Executive Director Renton, if you want to come in.
Convener and Councillor Ahern. That point was raised, I think it was an additional point that was agreed by the committee when we met in November, and invites and letters have gone out to the chief executives of all three of those organisations with the dates of future scrutiny and performance meetings, and asking them to attend. I've had feedback from Scottish Water about that. That at the moment, because of internal changes and work that they're doing to communicate issues and meet with staff within Scottish Water, at the moment the indication that would be the September committee. But already got, sort of, because if you remember, it was an invite. We cannot make these bodies come, but they're very keen to come to committee. And it's just, sort of a clash of diary dates and whatever.
Thank you, Director Renton. There were some shaking heads and tuts there. So I think we might need to work on the timing, because obviously September would be 12 months essentially since these events occurred. So we might have to have a further discussion with those external agencies. But in response to Bailey Hearn's point, I think let's add that to the outstanding business statement so that we track it, if that's okay. That being said, can we agree the outstanding business statement and to remove the completed items? Thank you very much. We'll now proceed with the substantive items of business on the agenda today. We have the three arm's length external organisations here in the chamber with us. From Perth Theatre and Concert Hall, we've got the Chief Executive, Christopher Glasgow, and the Chair, Mr. Hood. From Live Active Leisure, we have the Chief Executive, Paul Cromwell, and the Chair, David McElhose. And from Culture, Perth and Kinross, we've got the Chief Executive, she's just hiding behind Bailey Hearn, Helen Smout. So previously we've invited the arm's length external organisations, ALIOs from here on in, to give us a presentation, but I think we realised that that was taking up quite a lot of time in the committee meetings. So we had, I wrote to the three organisations and invited them to provide some upfront details and their latest set of management accounts, which they have all done. So thank you very much for completing that for us. And the members of the committee had an opportunity last Friday just to review those and look into areas that we might wish to ask questions on. So I will only invite the ALIOs to give a very brief 1-minute introduction, but we will take them in order. And then we'll ask questions in order. So we'll do Perth Theatre and Concert Hall, Live Active Leisure, Culture, Perth and Kinross. And then at the end, if there are any general questions for all three ALIOs, we'll ask those together. So without further ado, can I invite Mr. Glasgow, I think, just to give maybe a 1-minute, 2-minute max introduction on Perth Theatre and Concert Hall current state of affairs.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. So the information that we have provided to Scrutiny Committee is in response to the questions asked, but also informed by our new business plan. So the projects that we have selected are there because they're already underway, but they're actually all projects with longevity over the next 3 years. We have Teenage Fan Club, the Youth Music Initiative Fairview Residency, and our most recent one, the Cool Collective with Stanley Development Trust, Perth Grammar and Counterculture Studios. In the environmental sphere, we wanted to demonstrate what we're doing in a very practical way to cut down our consumption. but also to highlight again long term that we're looking at new income generation initiatives to support further environmental sustainability efforts, and also to feed that into our artistic programme in terms of how we share further messaging with audiences. And then the jewel in the crown, at least for us this week, is the Perthshire box office, which officially went live last Monday, has been very positively received. And in the current context especially, I think it was a really significant moment, not only launching the box office, but doing it in partnership with Culture Perth and Kinross to announce the first exhibition of the new Perth Museum.
Thanks very much, Mr. Glasgow. I know that the council in its budget last year had put an allocation aside to get the Perthshire box office up and running in this financial year, so that's very pleasing to see that that's happening. Can I invite questions from members, please? Bailey Hearn.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the report. My question is on conferencing and events, and I just wonder what the programme is with regards to businesses, organisations using the concert hall for conferences. I represent another venue in Perth, and we've had a number of people coming to us to ask about cost because they find the cost of the concert hall prohibitive in terms of trying to put a conference on there. And I just wonder whether that is the case for a lot of other businesses and organisations, or whether it's cost prohibitive and you're not getting that sort of business.
Thank you. So it varies depending on the business. So we have commercial rates for corporate clients, and then we had a charity rate for public sector clients. We've actually reviewed that over the past quarter and we've tiered that. So now for groups that are working with young people, for example, they have their own dedicated rate. We then have a middle rate for different adult groups that use our services. And then we have a top tier for other charitable organisations in receipt of public funding. So we have a number of tiers that are below our commercial rate. In terms of our commercial rate, we benchmark it against other comparable facilities across Scotland. Last year we did detailed competitor analysis. However, in the Perth and Kinross context and in the context of the ALIO review, something Paul, Helen and I have actually been discussing is actually could we agree a standard rate across all three arm's length external organisations for conferencing and event facilities and automatic referrals. So actually, if we reduce our rate and we see a big spike in bookings and suddenly don't have space to accommodate people, it means we could refer to LAL or vice versa. So actually we're looking to review our rates in line with Paul and Helen in the context of the ALIO review.
I'm interested to hear there you say you had a tiered rate for charitable organisations, and the charitable organisations that receive public funding would go on to the highest tier. But the public funding to charities is reducing, and that's to run core services. I just wondered why you're hitting them just because they're getting public funding.
So it's relative to the levels of funding they receive. So if we have a charity that's not in receipt of any sort of government support, as an example, it could be a voluntary run organisation, they'll come in at a different tier to a public sector body like us who receives money from trusts and foundations and Creative Scotland, as well as receiving donations from the public. So it's to do with their fundraising structure. So if they're in receipt of grants from other sources, they're in a different tier to a voluntary run organisation who are maybe solely dependent on individual giving. But we can send the detail over to you if you want in a breakdown.
If you could, because I still think in that answer, you're still penalising because they're getting a grant, because they're getting a public money from elsewhere, you're still putting them at a higher rate. Whereas as somebody that runs a charity and does get funding, we're only a very small charity, but under your guidelines there, because we receive grants and public funds, we would have to have a higher rate, which is what turns us off and what turns other organisations off using those facilities.
I absolutely take your point on board. I think the reason that we've actually changed and made a tiered system, so it used to just be a flat rate. It was, this is our charity rate and that's it. And it was reviewed every year. The reason that these tiers have been created is in response to charities who I've invited in and asked them for their feedback. So we are actually engaging charities who say it's too expensive for us, come in and speak to us. It doesn't mean that we can't do a deal to help. We want to help and we want to engage with the community in different ways. So, you know, these tiers have been created in response to those who have came to us and asked questions, and we've produced them in response to that.
Thank you. I think if you forward on the details of the tiers, that'd be helpful. Councillor Forbes, next question.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I just wondered about availability of space within the venues, because conscious there's a huge amount of space there and I guess it's not being used all the time. Do you regularly monitor what space you've got available? And I think you kind of answered this question in your response to Bailey Ahern's, but do you actively go out and seek stuff that might not be your logical connection to what your current business is? So for example, if someone wanted to run Pilates classes in one of your rooms, would you engage with them over that or anything similar to that?
Yes, we do. So it's not something that was done historically pre-pandemic, but we produced a new conferencing and events growth strategy last year, which also includes other community hires. So whether that be amateur groups that are directly aligned with the arts or other community groups who want to use our spaces. At the moment, I would say the majority of users are directly related to the arts unless they're a conference just coming to use conferencing facilities. But yes, you're right in terms of our space. It is something that we've included in our strategy and that we're working on.
Thank you. And Councillor Sharps.
Thank you, convener. My question's around the Perthshire box office, and I'll declare a wee bit of an interest in a former trustee of the Bookmark Festival, which you'll see from the report. Is one of the organisations that's made use of it. I know that Pitlochry Festival Theatre have been really good in their marketing of kind of packages around their, book a ticket to the theatre or a couple of nights and linking up with accommodation providers and others. Is there the opportunity, and I say this as using Bookmark as an example, that we're trying to attract an audience from further away. So is there an opportunity to use box office to book accommodation, travel options, that kind of thing, just to expand what's available? Thank you.
So yes, so that's in phase 2 of the plan now that we're up and running. So we're actually applying to other funding streams at the moment with a view to embed both accommodation booking and transport booking into the Perthshire box office in year 2. We're also going to embed an online shop, and we would like to work with the Perthshire artisans on that as a way of profiling other creatives across Perth and Kinross who don't have a ticketed product but could still benefit from increased profile on the platform. So essentially you're creating a space where someone that's booking for an event can actually literally make a whole day of it. They could go to the museum in the morning, take in some shopping or food in the afternoon, come to a concert at night, and then they've got their accommodation sorted as well.
Thank you for that. Can I ask about the kind of almost after you've used, so you've booked and you've had your lovely day and all the packages worked, what's the kind of follow-up in terms of, so you often, when you go to the theatre afterwards, you get the email asking, what you thought of the event and scoring it and everything. But is there then further promotion using, once you've got that email address, and promotion of, you enjoyed this, you might enjoy, the kind of Netflix model, you enjoyed this, you might like these. Does that then follow on through box office?
I feel like you've had a bug in our meeting rooms. It's great. So part of the challenge there, firstly, so for us, we use a dedicated piece of software called Purple 7, which I spoke about on Monday at BRG, and that's only available to performing arts organisations. So actually what we want to do for the Perthshire box office is create a piece of custom software that would enable us to apply a model that could work across all of the sectors that we're representing, and that's going to be part of the funding proposal through the same developer that has built the online shop.
Vice Convener.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction and the materials you've shared, Mr. Glasgow. Under the title of your approach to reducing carbon emissions, you've listed there the community show Castaways of Kinnoul Hill. Could you share a little of how that helps to reduce carbon emissions, or is it maybe a separate sort of educational mandate you have around climate change? Thank you.
So Castaways of Kinnoul Hill is an example of one of the shows that we're doing around wider public education and awareness of the impact of climate change. It's a key focus of our business plan and of our artistic plan for Creative Scotland. But for me, longer term, the reason why I think it's really important that we're producing artistic content in response to the climate emergency is because one of the most significant growing movements in individual giving is green arts philanthropy. And I think it's something that particularly younger generations are very proactive about, and something that we can start to bring them on a journey with us. And I think it's a really good way of engaging them. It also ties in with other projects where we've seen recent successes like Murmurations in Dunkeld, which was again an environmental focus and was very favourably received, and has informed actually an entire new programming strand of site-specific work. And then there's a wider part of messaging, I think, for me, to do with the environmental work that we want to preserve. And that's actually about celebrating the beauty of the natural landscape in Perth and Kinross and all that Perth and Kinross has to offer. I think, as I said before, the Murmurations Walk was right along the Dunkeld Trail. You couldn't ask for somewhere more beautiful to experience a piece of live theatre. And we're now looking at other site-specific locations across the region, some which are built up but have historical significance, and some which are in the natural environment. So for me, there's lots of approaches there. It is about environmental sustainability, but it's also about celebrating what we have here, generating income, and then putting that back towards further practical sustainability efforts.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Convener. My question would be that Dundee is known as the capital of the games, society type of thing. Lots of young people come up to me and say there's nothing to do in Perth, etc., etc. Have you ever engaged with them or talked with them to try and do something with, rather than compete against Dundee, but using it as a centre to have a games centre and work with them? Have you ever thought of these things at all? Thank you.
So something I had experience of in my previous role, which we actually discussed at our all staff day last Wednesday in terms of how we maximise the potential of the concert hall more, is there's a growing interest in, so you would get your John Williams concerts where it's maybe the RSNO playing Star Wars, of actually live concerts, but it's the game soundtracks that are done. So I was very lucky in my previous role to work on a project which was the game Dear Esther, which had a full orchestral soundtrack written to it. And gamers actually came and played live, so that was projected on screen, whilst the orchestra performed the music alongside them. So we've discussed things like that. In terms of engaging and how we understand what young people want, I suppose this would be a really good opportunity for me to direct you to Teenage Fan Club. So Teenage Fan Club's actually forming a steering group of young people, a paid steering group of young people who are both currently working with us and those who are non-attenders. And we're asking them to come in and work with our programming teams and tell the programmers what they want to see on our stages and how, more importantly, they want to see themselves represented on our stages. And that's why it's began with Castaways of Kinnoul Hill.
Thank you for that answer. It's all gobbledygook to me, but it's what the young ones want. Okay, thank you.
I'll go to Councillor Welsh next.
Thank you, Convener.
It's really building on the question around climate and storytelling. Are you collaborating with other organisations in Perthshire and indeed Perth itself to, for example, help tell some of these stories? We've got some very sort of strongly represented organisations, the Scottish Wildlife Trust, Royal Scottish Geographical Society, and this aspect of combining these organisations' knowledge and expertise to tell stories, could be compelling. Thank you.
Yes, so we actually did start a partnership up with the Scottish Wildlife Society as part of the Perthshire box office. Unfortunately, at the time, much as they were really interested to get involved, they just didn't have the capacity at that moment, but the conversation's still open. Similarly, we have a really good relationship with the Royal Geographic Society, who frequently put events on in the concert hall. But again, just to narrow into quite a specific project and a specific example, we're currently running another Perth and Kinross-wide audience development project called Transforming Audience Travel Through Art. And the reason that project came about is because our biggest source of carbon emissions is the public coming to our events. 82% of people are dependent on cars to get to our venues. So we created this project, but for a change, is not me leading an audience development project, and it's an artist. So artist Helen McCrory has collaborated with creative organisations all across Perth to look at different ways that she can map and create creative responses to the various climate challenges the communities are facing. So we've done a lot of work with the climate cafes, the Craigie Choir, the Cacophony Orchestra, to name but a few, and we're already receiving interest in that project continuing into next year to say, well, we've done the artistic work, we've created the creative response, so what are the practical outcomes that come out of that for the communities?
Thank you. That was really interesting and helpful to hear. Thank you.
And a second question from Bailey Hurt.
Thank you very much. I'm currently on the Perthshire box office website and I'm looking at the venues. And I have to declare a small interest here as I'm the cathedral manager for St Ninians Cathedral. And I can understand AK Bell, Perth Art Gallery, Perth Concert Hall, Perth Museum, Perth Theatre, but you have St John's Kirk on there. And I'm just wondering if they approached you to go onto the Perthshire box office, and if so, other venues, are they able to have discussions with you to go onto the Perthshire box office?
So absolutely any venue or any event provider in Perth and Kinross is welcome to come on to the Perthshire box office. So we started with an initial pilot to get us to this point, and that was with 6 community partners. Bookmark were one of them. St John's Kirk came through one of our friends who's now doing tours and said it was actually an organic conversation. It was nothing originally to do with Perthshire box office. Had said, like you've done there, could we get involved? However, we do have a permanent project manager in place now, and a key part of her role now that she's actually got the platform up and running is going out and, for want of a better term, selling Perthshire box office to different venues and partners across the region. So yes, all welcome.
Thanks, Bailey Hurt. You nicked my question, so I'm not going to let you in with a second one again. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment. Last call. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Glasgow. Can we hear now a brief introduction maybe from Mr. Cromwell, just again a minute or two from Live Active Leisure. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everybody. I'll maybe just start, seeing as the financial statement's up on the screen, with just a very brief update in terms of our financial position. So what this report provides you with is a snapshot of November's figures, but also a year-to-date running total. So first, councillors will be aware that we started last year with a fairly significant forecast deficit of over 600,000. Now, over the first 6 months of trading, we're in a position where we were looking at potentially reducing that Obviously, we had some events happen in October, November, namely Bells, and obviously we had some unplanned closures at Perth Leisure Pool, which impacted, which is why you'll see there's a bit of a drop there in terms of the deficit position in November. But hopefully what you can see is more positively in the year to date, that despite some of these challenges at this point, although we had a deficit of minus 155, it was still significantly ahead of the forecast deficit position that we've been in. Now, some of that's been down to increased income and increased engagement with customers. It's been about how we've been more prudent with investments, making sure that we take advantage of treasury management and opportunities with interest rates. And also in terms of just making sure that we're managing our budgets. And as you can see from the staffing budget there, particularly keeping a very close eye on our staffing budget to try and reduce the deficit. In terms of the report, the key areas that I was asked to provide, there's a strong link there between active schools and our community sports in terms of reducing barriers. And I think between these two areas of business, we fundamentally, support the key local outcome areas and priorities in terms of supporting people in poverty and physical and mental health, and certainly in terms of employability and training. So everybody knows that our active schools programme is a universally free programme, providing activity before, during and after school. But I hope the report's provided you with a bit more detail in terms of how extensive the programme is and the programmes that are part of that operation, in terms of how we target and ensure that we're making sure that we're getting people active where they previously have been inactive, and making sure that we've got that targeted activity. We also focus very much on our LEAD programme, which is our leadership, employability and development programme, which has a range of activities within it, such as our aspiring coaches programme and our Activate programme. And of course, these all link in very clearly towards our community sports programme, where much of the development and mentoring and leadership and gaining of qualifications then can benefit in terms of our wider sports clubs and developing volunteers. Again, in terms of community sport, we provide a range of opportunities there. We support clubs. We have a PACES accreditation scheme, which makes sure that our clubs follow correct guidance, that they're provided with coach education classes, and again, they link up with our active schools programme. We also have a significant amount of work that we do with our wellbeing team in terms of our physical activity pathway. And again, you'll see from the report some of the amazing work that we're doing in terms of care at home and buddy walking and kit banks, all of which making a significant contribution to people being active, staying active and getting more active. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Cromwell. And first question is from Bailey Hearn.
Thank you very much for that report. You touched on it very briefly, and that was the issues you've got at Bells. And with Bells being in my ward, I was just wondered if you can give us an update on when it's likely to be open, or parts of it are likely to be open again.
Thank you, Councillor. We still have our areas of Bells that are available at the moment. So there was areas that weren't impacted by the flood in October. So we're still delivering some of our classes from the upstairs studios. So we still have a skeleton structure in place, and we're still providing that essential service. We've obviously moved as many activities and sports as we can to other venues within Perth, utilising Dewars and the schools and North Inch and wherever we can. And I have to say thanks to the council that have been very supportive in terms of how we try and mitigate the obvious impact that we have with Bells being closed at the moment. Obviously, council has had the leisure asset review report and discussed that at length last Monday. As part of that review, we're looking at what that transition plan looks like over the next 5 years to when PH2 is there. So I think what we still need to determine is what that transition plan looks like. We are doing an options appraisal, if you like, at the moment to inform those decisions. And I would hope that we will have more information in terms of that over the course of the next few weeks.
Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Mr. Cromwell, for your report. I think those of us who have involvement with anyone from the Active Schools programme know how much fantastic work is done. And I also have an involvement through one of the organisations I work with on the Aspiring Coaches programme, and it's absolutely fantastic and is really helping us to develop talent locally, with a view to those people going on and adding to coaches within the community. My question was about the fact that we know that when children are young, parents will take them to lots of activities. They get opportunities at school. They then hit high school, and that, unless they're already focused on a particular sporting activity, they tend to sort of drift away. And by the time they've left school, unless they have a particular sport that they love, it kind of really does drop off a cliff. And I just want to know how Live Active are managing that, given that we are all encouraging everybody to engage in healthy lifestyles. How do you encourage that transition through primary into secondary and then into post-school to keep your customer levels up?
Thank you, Councillor. I think we're trying to provide what's really is an integrated approach. You're quite right. We need to make sure that we stay engaged through their schools and the Active Schools programme, and that's a key opportunity there. We obviously have lots of our youngsters are already in the club structure, so we make sure through the way community sport and interact with our clubs that we already have that connection. We have that connection in terms of how the clubs are developed. We also have that connection in terms of as you've just mentioned, in terms of the volunteer hours that our Aspire coaches fulfil as part of that journey. I think by having the teams integrated into our venues and services, and obviously we need to we always reflect what the level of demands, what the new activities are, what the trends are in terms of what we provide in our venues and services as well. And I think we've seen significant growth and if I go back to Bell's Fitness Gym, we saw a significant growth there in terms of youngsters using that facility and girls. And I've got some of the figures for our Q2 in terms of venue usage in front of me, which I'll just have a look at. So in terms of attendances by girls and women, for example, then we're up on each activity, whether that's swimming, fitness gym, fitness classes and sports all use and casual on the previous year. So I think we're making significant gains there, and we've got to just make sure that we remain focused. I think one of the key things the Active Schools team do is they support and mentor our pupils so that they have a voice, whether that's through the young person sports panel or through the ambassador program. What we need to make sure is that we're developing young people, as I say, to be able to say what they would like so that they can engage with fellow pupils. So we make sure that we're getting that intelligence, if you like, in terms of what the trends are from their perspective and what they would like to see happen. Obviously, the youth sports panel is fairly new. It started last year, and again, it should link in terms of just providing that voice, if you like, and ensuring that we are listening to that and developing our activities around it.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Mr. Cromwell. I really am still at the age where I enjoy a lot of your facilities, especially the North Inch campus. What I would like to know is how do you engage and how do you bring forward new sports? One I'll be bringing forward to you obviously is pickleball, right? Paddleball, etc. How do you engage in that? How do you bring it forward?
Well, I think the honest answer there is in a few ways. Sometimes, and I think I've mentioned this before, we have programming staff. We want them to be aspirational, so we'll make sure that they understand the trends, whether that's through attending various meetings with other people across Scotland and the UK in terms of understanding what the new trends are. So I think there's a lot we can get just from the industry sector in terms of trying to see what's coming ahead of us, and that informs a lot of what we do. I think beyond that, there's obviously the public's imagination and what they've also seen. So of course we have facilities that are available and we have those conversations, and if we can adapt any of our court spaces to be able to provide new activities, then we do that. So I suppose it's a mixture of both of these things together in terms of what we introduce, and it will be the same for classes. So in terms of group fitness, we have to sometimes people don't know what the next trend is. That's our job, to find that and to stimulate that demand and be aspirational and make sure we've got something that's fun and innovative and not, you know, the typical old program. So that's something that we're very, very alive to, and we obviously have to monitor and get feedback from our customers in terms of the activities that they would like to see.
I would like just to come back slightly on that, right? We are very active in pickleball, and pickleball is becoming one of the most up-to-date sports you can think about. But down at the Northlands campus, you haven't even provided us with nets. Now we can go up to the technical college and they're there. So we need to really, if you're going to encourage it, you need to know what's on the floor. Thank you. Sorry.
I will look at that immediately. I'm not quite sure why you don't have nets. It's something we'll look at. Thank you.
Vice Convener.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and the materials you shared in advance. Just looking at those materials, it mentions under the Active School report that 21% of pupils in SMID or SIMD Q1, which is the most deprived, took part, compared to a much higher percentage, 31, in the least deprived, the quartile 5. Is that something that LAL is able to help address that disparity, or is part of the challenge here that it's self-selecting by the schools, that you're receiving more children from schools to that activity from the more better off backgrounds? Thank you.
So Active Schools is universal, but we're also extremely proactive in making sure that we're targeting those that are inactive, and particularly those that are from target areas. So that's something that we have the data. Obviously, Active Schools is not a standalone LAL program. Our Active Schools teams work very, very closely with schools. Through the information that we have jointly, we can target very, very clearly and very closely in terms of the children that are inactive and that we need to support. And we've obviously provided, we got funded for an event you might have heard of called Give It Loudy last year, where again we had over 200 girls from that had been inactive taking part in 5 different events, you know, and anybody that went along to that would, you know, it's just a completely amazing transformational event that our young people are attending. And the activities are, again, I go back to what we're trying to do is give young people a clear voice in terms of what they would like to see. So the activities that were delivered across the event were ones that they themselves had chosen. So yes, you know, we want to make, what we don't want is drop off. You know, we need to make sure we have a universal offer, but where we can, we're absolutely targeting. We need to make inroads. Our Active Schools team are absolutely limitless energy as well in terms of finding additional pockets of funding, which then provide other little smaller projects, whether that's supporting primary school children doing various activities as well. So the Active Schools and the Active Schools program is much more than what it maybe looks like on the surface in terms of what we're trying to do to make sure that we're engaging with our young people and keeping them active.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Mr. Cromwell, for all your presentation. Live Active Leisure carries out loads of activities through a big spread of different sports and leisure pursuits. Given the financial constraints that we all face, what activity would you say is going to be the hardest one to safeguard going forward?
Again, I'll probably refer to the report that was considered by Council last Monday, which I think probably laid out the range of activities we provide, and in terms of the detail around which activities are most attended. And those are as swimming and fitness, whether that's fitness gyms or in terms of group fitness. Now, we obviously have a wider range of activities than that, including sports hall and clubs and curling and indoor bowling, to mention just but a few. So, you know, I think the report's laid out the direction of travel. There's further work to be done in that in terms of bringing back a business case in August in terms of what a PH2O looks like. I think the actual report laid out a fairly clear strategic provision in terms of venues across our areas. I think the challenge we need to work together now is to make sure that we can retain that over the next few years until PH2O is available for everybody.
Councillor
Thank you.
Welch.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Mr. Cromwell, for the information. I've got two questions. I can maybe ask the first one. Obviously, well, not obviously, but the Perth Cross Council is carrying out a wider asset review in terms of trying to identify, what buildings actually we need to deliver effectively those outputs. It's obviously disappointing with the instance with the North Inch and the impact on facilities. In terms of the way that has allowed you to sort of approach utilising or accessing other Perth Cross Council facilities, for example, schools, does that, for example, give you opportunities to be a bit more sort of flexible as part of sort of future planning? And the second question was sports that haven't been able to repurpose into other physical locations. I'm thinking, for example, sports like squash, but there could be others. What are you doing to support those sports just now and those clubs that are involved with those?
Sorry. Hi then. Okay, in terms of how are we mitigating the impact that we've had at Bells? Well, obviously we have worked closely with the council in terms of other venues. It's a significant amount of space that's been impacted. So, it's our main arena, for example, is 17 courts equivalent. So to try and mitigate that across the existing estate with the existing bookings, it's not a like-for-like match, and obviously daytime use, for example, in the schools is obviously limited. So there are some capacity issues, and that's one of the reasons why we're really doing an options appraisal to fully understand that. So yes, I think to your question is, will it allow us to have a different view of Bells and more flexibility? Then yes, but I think we need to go through the data gathering part of this process at the moment to understand exactly what that looks like. So we are doing that. We remain engaged with customers. We obviously, those that we've managed to relocate, it perhaps isn't their ideal position, but we're staying in touch with them. For those that we haven't, again, we are staying in touch with them. But obviously, people get a little bit frustrated if their activity hasn't got any accommodation. That's something we're trying to manage. In terms of events, which obviously Bells has a significant number of events. Again, we're engaged constantly or regularly with event organisers. Many of them have, again, also found alternative accommodation elsewhere. It might, again, not be ideal, but most of them have found alternative accommodation. So, yeah, it's a challenging position to find ourselves in, but we are trying to do everything we possibly can to mitigate where we can, where it's possible. But it is a bit of a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Second question was specifically about gym and fitness provision. As somebody who used the recently opened facility at Bells, it was tremendously encouraging to see how busy it indeed was, and in particular with youngsters, both young men, young people, both sexes, really getting stuck in. The question I've been asked most about Bells is the gym going to be reinstated in its current location? If so, when, and if not, where and when? Thank you.
I think I have to go back to my previous answer at the moment and say we're obviously having that discussion. We're doing an options appraisal. We're looking at what flexibility we have. We're looking at what the unmet demand is so that we can understand what that looks like. We obviously the council have agreed to a 5-year transition plan until PH2O is here, and we consolidate the 3 venues. So that's something we need to keep in mind, that decision's been made. We need to also obviously look at the capital cost in terms of what the funding looks like. So yeah, we're aware of the fitness gym. We think it was a marvelous success. It was a great gym. We want to be able to provide that again. I've already mentioned that we had a huge upturn in terms of youth usage, as well as adult usage, I have to say. So we've got a great model there that we understand works, and that we just need to decide how we're replicating that. And that's something that we're working closely with the council on at the moment.
Councillor Showers.
Thank you, convener. This question is perhaps not just for Mr. Cromwell, but across all three organisations. It was building on the box office concept. If, as a parent, you have 3 children and you're looking for activities over the school half term or the summer holidays, and you've got one child who is football daft, you've got one child who's into performing arts, and you've got another who, and Helen will laugh at this, fancies being an archaeologist because she knows that child. How do you, as a parent, maximise the reach that you can get into what's on offer across your 3 organisations without then drifting off to look at other options? How do you make it as easy as possible for people to give you their business and get their children engaged in those activities? Is there a platform that, or do we have to go raking around through lots of different leaflets to do that?
I think from a purely practical platform point of view, a box office system is slightly different from a booking system, so we would need to look at additional software, but that's not to say that that can't happen. So actually, although the public can't tell this, but Perthshire Box Office is currently running 2 separate ticketing systems based on different needs. So for example, if you book an event, it's quite a simple setup. If you want to do ticketed time slots for a museum where suddenly you have 24 events in one day, that's an entirely different story. So that's something that we worked with Culture Perth and Kinross on to look at a way to do that in a way that streamlines the customer journey and makes life easier for them. And I think it's fair to say it's something all 3 of us have spoken about in terms of wider booking facilities that platform could offer, but actually how we could come together and actually use that to curate a programme across the 3 ALIOs for different summer school activities.
If I could just add, I mean, obviously, again, the report, the Leisure Asset Review also talked about one estate. So that's very much part of, discussions we've had about the ALIO consolidation, but it also goes beyond that, even within sport and leisure, as I've talked about using school facilities. Again, how they're booked is also different to how you would book LAL facilities at the moment. So I think as part of that wider, how do we operate this as a one estate program is something that we are, it's clear in our actions to develop, whether it's software or whether it's other means or whether it's we need to look at how we actually do it. And it's, for us, it's certainly not just a booking. You have to look at how you're strategically using the space you have to maximise that and make sure that it's suitable for all sports. So I think there's connecting conversations there in terms of how we manage this as a one estate going forward. But that's certainly key, and it's a key part of the objectives we have moving forward.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith, you had a comment.
Right, thank you, convener. First of all, I'd like, been in sport all my life, I'd like to thank any organisation that promotes sport in all forms. I think you're doing a great job for all ages as well. I would like to note that I would particularly like to say that the staff at the Northlands campus are absolutely first class. They really are the best. The one thing I'd like to say down there is that how popular the artificial pitches are. And the guys do a great job. Unfortunately, staffing is difficult for them when they've got so much youngsters running about going crazy. So it would be a wee bit helpful if we could maybe look into that a wee bit. Thank you.
I think that's part of our young person's activity, I think, by the sound of that. So yeah, we'll have a look, and thank you very much.
Thank you then, Mr. Cromwell. And so we'll move on, there being no other questions indicated, to Ms. Smout, the Chief Executive of Culture Perth and Ross. A very brief 1 or 2 minute introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, convener, and hello to everybody. Can I just start very quickly with an apology from my chair, who's been called into a debate at Westminster today, so he was unable to attend. So apologies to the committee for that. Just to touch very briefly, and to echo many of the things that my colleagues have already said, there's a great deal of work going on which is targeted at those who are most in need across our area, and our schools work that was in the report highlights the way in which we are working with a select group of schools as well as a more universal schools offer in order to ensure that those who need us most are getting the most from our services. We've also touched again on the libraries and how we continue to develop the library services, and again we're looking at what our community needs are. So we're in discussion at the moment, in addition to what's in the paper there, with Barclays, who are withdrawing their banking services from Perth, and how we can help support a community access to banking services at the AK Bell, and to organisations like Victim Support, who want to have a presence and a continued presence in Perth and in the area, and how we can support that with access to facilities, again, through our libraries. So we're continuing to work with partners to collaborate and to seek to extend the services that meet those at a particularly difficult time for communities, and how we can add value to their experience of the services that we have. You'll see from our most recent financial statement that we continue to exert tight fiscal control in terms of costs, but we are, like every organisation, under pressure with rising wages and rising costs of running the business, but are managing to pull ourselves into a much more favourable position by year end, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Members? Come on, we're not going to let them off that easily. Anybody?
Convener, I've just
Really?
put a queue in the box, but it seems to have disappeared.
Oh, right. Okay. Go for it, Councillor Forbes.
Thanks. Helen, thanks very much for that. I think, as you know, I'm a big fan of libraries. I like to just go in and look and see what sort of falls off the shelf for me. Just what's your instinct for the long-term future of libraries, not necessarily in Perth and Kinross, but across the whole country? Because every time I go into the library, I seem to see that there's less and less other people there.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk to another fan of libraries. I think that there is a future for libraries. I think there's a lot of debate and a lot of discussion about usage. Currently, usage locally and across Scotland is around 25% lower than it was pre-pandemic. However, we still have in Perth and Kinross 1 in 10 people coming into our libraries on a weekly or 2-weekly basis. So they remain well used within that broader context of some decline. Some of that is about the change in which people have made in their lives. We have more technology, more access to books and resources online. There are many more books, physical books available in places like supermarkets, and there's lots of second-hand bookshops, charity bookshops and other places. So there are lots of ways. So people are not reading less and they're not accessing reading material less, but how they access their libraries are changing. So we are seeing a lot more use, which is perhaps less traditional. So coming in to use services like Lend and Mend, coming in to use our embroidery machine is blown up. Everybody wants to do embroidery in the library, coming in to get benefits advice, coming in to get other services. So it's a change in how people are using their library. When they use the library, how they use the library, all of that is moving, and that's a Scottish picture, and one in which all library services are thinking hard about what does the shape of our library service need to look like in the future? What actually serves those needs? And is it more about being a collaborative community hub that offers enhanced services rather than something that is perhaps in every community? A community often looks at a library as being a building, and it's not. It's the set of services and activity and engagements that happen in that building, and those can happen in different ways, whether that's online, whether that's in person, whether that's in a co-located building, or indeed whether it is in a physical library building. So every service across the country is looking at how we evolve and adapt in a period of quite fast-paced change, while still focusing on those in the community that need us most. So I think there is a very strong need for a library service, but what that looks like, where it's delivered, and what experience our customers have of it will change over time.
Thank you. Councillor Shire.
Thank you, Convener. My question's on the report. There's a huge amount of detail in the report about engagement with schools, and it's really encouraging. And again, from my ward work, I know of youngsters that have been involved in some of these projects. I suppose my question is about measuring outcomes from. You've had all these young people, you've got them through the projects. All that money's been invested, in these successful. In the delivery, but what are the outcomes? What do you want to see from it, and how will you measure that?
Thank you. So our outcome is simple. We want to build a generation of young people who are interested, engaged in their heritage, and that are engaging in heritage activities. So it's not just about their activity within the museum or the art gallery. It's about their activity more broadly in their community and their understanding of their heritage, because that gives a very powerful sense of both place and identity for people. So measuring that's not always straightforward, but it is about looking at long term. So what is the engagement? Immediate things, we want to see people who want to bring their parents to the museum, who want to come, who want to talk about it, who engage with it, and who can talk passionately about that. And we're seeing that some of those primary school kids are giving our curators a run for their money. And it's that generational thing. It's giving people the access to that they take forward into adulthood. So it's also about the translation of engagement in adults that we see. So we work very closely with the schools to align what we're doing with the curricular outcomes so that they can evidence that they're achieving that within a classroom setting. But for ourselves, we're looking at that engagement, we're looking at those repeat visits, we're looking at the ways in which that audience continues to grow and that we can grow with it.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Convener. Something just cropped up there when you were talking about libraries. I personally go and visit an elderly lady every day who cannot get out at all, and our only enjoyment at the moment is reading. And as far as I know, she buys all her books, etc. And I don't know, is there a service that can be provided for her?
Yes, sorry. We have our Books on Wheels service. So we used to work in partnership with the Royal Voluntary Service to deliver books to people who are housebound for a variety of reasons and of any age. We now have all of those volunteers working directly with us. So if you ask her to get in touch with the library, we'd be very happy to sign her up to service. And books are delivered on a 2-weekly or monthly basis to people who are at home. We also have our online library services. So if she doesn't want to go online, but they are available 24/7, but we can talk her through how to do that and how to download books and things as well. But the Books on Wheels service currently deliver to anybody who's unable to leave their home for any reason in order to make sure they've got reading material free.
Thanks very much. I think that's a service that maybe people weren't aware of, so good to give it a little bit of an airing. Councillor Welch.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Helen. Helen, again, I'm a great advocate of libraries and very much their use potentially going forward as an enhanced community space. And I think it's incredibly important because we have some great physical spaces that I'm sure all
librarians and libraries really want to see good footfall, because ultimately, getting people into buildings and then them realising actually the opportunities to do things and be creative. So in that aspect of you mentioned one in terms of embroidery. Are you trying to sort of identify other opportunities for that collaborative engagement to really sort of identify spaces within libraries that for example, creativity, even for example, to get a really good cup of coffee while you're doing something that actually gets people in and do things? Thank you.
So all our staff are very engaged with their local community and participate in a lot of the community planning activities and the local partnerships in order that they've got good understanding of what's needed in each locality. What's needed in Blairgowrie is not quite the same as what might be needed in Crieff, for example. So we do try and have a core offer in each of our library services, but then tailor each local provision to what local groups might need and try and support that. So we would certainly want to continue in that vein and to continue to build discrete library services, if you like, within a generic whole that do support those individual needs. In terms of coffee, you can certainly get a cup of coffee in the AK Bell and manage that. Within the hub library services, we're slightly tied because of the Tayside contracts who offer teas and coffees in the campus libraries. And some of our smaller libraries, we did pilot coffee at Comrie Library, and people could go in and have a coffee, and we thought that would all be wonderful. And actually, as it turned out, we didn't. They weren't really that fussed about having a coffee when they came. So we do try to look at all of these things and see what works well. But in most of our services, you can get a coffee either next to the library or within it.
And back to Councillor Forbes for a second question.
Thanks, Convener. Helen, I hope you don't mind just a really specific question. Thanks for the tour you allowed us all to attend of the new Perth Museum a few weeks ago. It was really good, and I'm really impressed with the work that's been done there. When we were in the cafe area, I think there's some comments that it was very echoey, almost to the point of being probably uncomfortable. And I wonder if there's any work underway to try and resolve that problem with the architects or the builders.
Yes, so thank you. It is was the former Lesser City Hall part of the building. So it was built to carry sound. It was originally the bones of it there. So you're absolutely right. However, as we begin to start putting more and more furniture in, we're deliberately picking furniture and materials that will help dampen that sound. And we are looking at options if we can't get the sound to a level where we feel it's comfortable to sit for a period of time in. Then we have the option of some acoustic panels on one of the main walls as well. So we've got options there, but as we start to populate it, I think you were in when there was very little in the space, and that certainly adds to that echoiness. But we will have some very nice, comfortable seating that will certainly absorb a lot of the sound.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to sampling it. Cheers.
Thanks. And Ms. Robertson, you wanted to come in as well.
Thanks, Convener. Councillor Forbes, we did an acoustic survey of the building. So as Helen says, there is some, within the design, there is some factoring in, but you will see a difference once the building's opened and fully furnished and populated.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat. Last call. But we'll also move on to, I think we've covered everything, but I'm going to offer members the chance, just if there are any general questions to all three ALIOs about whatever it might be, working together, coordination of provision or anything like that. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I've got a question for all three ALIOs. UHI PER supports individuals of all ages and backgrounds to gain skills and qualifications? Do you work in partnership with the UHI and use their expertise in training of employees? I'm particularly talking about the Academy of Sport and Wellbeing and the creative and culture industry sector.
I'm happy to come in there very briefly. Yes, we do link with them. We link with them in terms of coach education and the courses there and active schools and community sport. And we also do the same in terms of engagement with them in terms of our staff development and employee plans. So yes, we have a working relationship in a number of different ways.
Yes, just to say we do have a working relationship. We work with the creative industries and particularly those who are doing their art related courses. We've held exhibitions of work at the art gallery and we work in partnership with them on a number of different projects. We're also working with the hospitalities team around the cafe provision and the opportunities for placements and working closely together around that provision as well.
Yes, we also work in partnership with UHI. So this year we became part of their scholarship programme for skills development, and we chose to go down the hair and makeup route for stage. Our head of technical services is also working with Perth UHI to shape their technical degree, and we now host the flying exams in the theatre for the technical students.
Thank you. And I'll maybe ask a question then about shared services. So one of the sort of key themes for the council when we've been speaking to the ALIOs is about the opportunities that are for shared services, and we've heard about how Perthshire box office is being used to for ticketing the museum. What's next on the agenda for all of you in terms of collaboration and shared services?
So there are a number of different areas that we're sort of keen to take forward, particularly now that the ALIO review paper's been through council. One of them's already been mentioned around ticket conferencing and shared facilities. We all have venue hire to some degree, so how do we make that work more effectively across the three organisations? There's also areas around things like shared recruitment. Some of us have similar roles in the organisation and looking at that, whether that's operations staff or supply staff, for example, casual staff, things like that. There are also some shared and common areas of expertise that we would want to look at. So things like freedom of information and managing GDPR, procurement. So all of that, we're looking at how we can do that across the three organisations. Not necessarily producing any savings in some of those activities, but certainly producing much more efficient ways of working and ensuring that there is a consistency of approach around particularly a lot of the corporate activity.
Thank you very much. That was a really encouraging answer. I think we'll want to return to that and check on progress in future meetings. I'm not seeing any other questions from members. Last call. Okay. We'll draw that item to a close then. I'd like to thank the three ALIOs very much, the three chief executives and the two chairs who could manage to be here. Thank you very much for your presentations and for attending today and for answering members' questions. We'll take just 3 minutes until 10:50, just to allow the ALIOs to leave the meeting, and then we'll proceed with the next item on the agenda. Okay, thank you, members. We'll now proceed to item 7 on the agenda, which is our continuation of the review of the extreme weather events in Perth and Kinross during October 2023. During our November meeting, we had reviewed up to 6.71 in the report, if memory serves. So we're starting from the previous paper on page 24. We're going to go through the subheadings for section 7 in order. So the first one will be notifications and preparedness, then communication, then response management, so that we get that chronological flow to the questions. We've got a range of officers here in the chamber, and we may have some online, I think, ready to answer questions. Just a reminder that Executive Director Renton has to leave us at 12, so we've got an hour and 5 minutes to get any questions in, which specifically relate to Director Renton, if you have any. Executive Director Renton, if I could invite you to just give a brief 1 or 2 minute introduction. We have been supplied, I think, with the updated improvement plan, if you want to address any of the actions that have been taken, or if you want to talk to the original report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As the report notes, this is a follow-up, and as you've said, to the previous report, which was discussed at the meeting of the 22nd of November. There was insufficient time to address the remainder of the report, as you've already covered, and and this is part of the agreement to discuss the rest of the report and the improvement plan. At the meeting in November, further actions were agreed by the committee for the improvement plan. These are shown in the updated plan, along with progress to date on all of the identified actions in Appendix A. The new actions for inclusion were appropriate allocation of the approved funding to communities to support resilience in terms of both training and equipment. The review is to include a clearer and better tested plan B for when something goes wrong with a piece of infrastructure, develop a protocol to share vulnerable people lists during emergencies, and as we've already discussed at the committee this morning, to invite representatives from SEPA, SSE and Scottish Water to attend a future Scrutiny and Performance Committee. I'm pleased to report that good progress has been made against all of the actions, including the additional ones added by the committee in November. And the one that had a December 2023 date has already been concluded and was used operationally over the course of the storm on the 27th of December and going forward as well. The team and I, as always, are happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Renton. Bailey Hearn, you've got a point of clarification.
Yeah, you're just intending to go through the old paper from November 1st and then come to this new one after that?
Exactly so. Okay, so starting at section 7 on page 24 of the previous paper, questions from elected members. So first of all, this is the 16th to 21st of October, known as Storm Babette weather event. Questions on notification and preparedness. Okay, moving on to 7.8, 7.9, questions on communication. Okay, questions on response management, that's sections 7.10 to 7.17. Vice Convener.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and all the work that went into this report and what's ongoing with the actions from last time, obviously, as well. 7.10 describes the events in Invergowrie, which is in my ward, so I have a sort of parochial interest here as well as a scrutiny interest. It describes here that there were 7 properties experienced internal flooding. So the first part of my question is, do we have a revised number? Because I think once the grant applications were available, we became aware that there were more properties suffered internal flooding than we initially thought. So do we have a revised number? And then also I know that we can't speak for SEPA, but the last part of that section mentions that SEPA will provide an assessment of the storm event when data analysis is complete. Do we have any ETA or any early indication from SEPA of what the findings will be on that? Thank you.
Mark's going to take that question.
Yeah, thanks for the question. In terms of the first part of the question, is that okay? Yeah, in terms of the first part of the question around how many properties experienced internal flooding, the figures that I've got is 49 properties, residential properties, and 5 businesses, and all of those have received grant funding from the Scottish Government's monies for Storm Babette.
And then regarding SEPA?
At this moment in time, I can't provide any update on the discussion with SEPA. I know we've spoken to SEPA around protocols following the events of the 7th and 8th of October, but that's the only update I've got at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Butterworth. And then following up on the initial answer you gave there about the report says that at that time, so when this report was put together in November, we estimated there were 7 experiencing some internal flooding. You mentioned then since we're now aware of 49 that experienced internal flooding. What's the reason for that difference? Is it simply that we didn't receive contact from everyone who received internal flooding? Is that simply it?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the time, we'd engaged with those homeowners or business owners. Lots of business owners and homeowners just, put their own resilience in place and deal with their issues themselves. And we rely very much on properties or property owners coming to us and engaging with us directly. But at the time of writing, there was 7, but obviously since then, there's been a lot more.
And if I may add as well, sort of as part of our arrangements, then the village of Invergowrie, as we're doing with other areas that are flooded, were leafleted, and asked, for comments back. And I think that that has created, sort of more contact with the council in terms of the event.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I'm just reading 7.16, and it references quite a lot of LRPs, which I think is that local resilience partnership, and IMTs, instant management teams. There seems to be quite a lot of these things from, I think it's the north of Scotland, and then a Tayside one, then a local one. I wonder if officers, if I can get a sense from officers, of having so many groups and so many people involved in so many of these meetings to attend, did that help the situation, or did you find your staff were getting tied up in meetings and not actually getting to the local work on the ground?
I can't speak for Storm Babette, and Fraser Crofts may want to come in on that. But generally, and in my experience, then the links with the local resilience partnership across Tayside can be very helpful in terms of ensuring that all partners are aware of the issues that are going on across all 3 local authority areas, and then the links back into our own incident management team. What's particularly useful at those meetings in normal circumstances is that we will have colleagues from the Met Office, from SEPA and SSE network, who are then able to provide very up-to-date forecasts with the weather, where they're seeing or experiencing issues in terms of flooding and where there may be power outages as well. So from my experience, Councillor Forbes, then we will plan round about, those, we will put into action, things that we're getting from LRP and from the IMTs into the LRPs, which just adds to the picture and to help our response there. But Fraser might want to say anything more in terms of Storm Babette in particular.
Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, just to concur, I think that in terms of the way the command structure works, particularly with the gold, silver and kind of bronze setup for an event as significant as this, is helpful. The gold commander has that overarching view and that liaison at a regional or indeed national level, and at a more localised level, the operational silver side of things, if you like, can carry on and proceed with the deployment of resources, etc., at a local level. So nothing really further to add to what Barbara said, other than in the main it is of value and it works for us. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you both.
Bailey Hearn.
Yeah, I'd like to just follow on from that, and I just wonder, with the various agencies involved, and this is a major emergency, are the agencies in the same room so that you get an instant response from the agencies? I know there's technology, so you could use Teams, which could be constantly on. But certainly in the military and other places I've been, all departments, all agencies are in the same room so that you can get an instant response across the room. And I do refer back to the previous weekend, there was communications difficulties between Scottish Water, SEPA and the council. That would have been resolved had those agencies been in the same room. So in future events or during the Babette, were those agencies, or are there plans to have those agencies in exactly the same room, or the facilities online in the same room?
If I may come in, Bailey Ahern, not all that long ago, local resilience partnership meetings in an emergency were held by telephone and conference call, which worked well even in those days, but obviously with the advent on Teams, then that allows us to, very quickly organise meetings. There is a danger, particularly in weather circumstances, where if you were asking any member of staff from any organisation to travel, then you could be putting them at risk. And there are many meetings where officers of the council are actually out, dealing with something, and to ask them to travel back into a meeting face to face. The other issue is that clearly for other colleagues in other organisations, and I include the police and particularly the Met Office, SEPA and SSEN, they will have, many and potentially many other such meetings to attend, and trying to get everyone into a room to be able to do that timeously with the information that we need when we need it would prove problematic.
Thank you. And Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Convener. Just a brief question. This is a very interesting report. I've done work like this before in my other life, and I'm just wondering if you'd feel it's useful to maybe hold an exercise on an extreme weather events or such like, just to see where our weaknesses might be. Thanks.
I would suggest that the weather that we've had over the last few months has provided, plenty of real life opportunities. And indeed, the weather event on the 27th of December, where we had, snow, so that the Roads Maintenance Partnership were actually gritting and ploughing in the northeast of Perth and Kinross. We were dealing with flooding across many other parts of Perth and Kinross. And then we had road closures on the A9. We had issues on the bridge of Cali on the A93, and then to add to that mix, then there was a closure of the snow gates at Drummochter, which obviously then merited some response for the council in terms of a rest centre. If somebody honestly had come to me with that scenario, I would have gone, don't be ridiculous, that's too many things happening at the one time. So I think that we will always exercise. We exercise both across the local resilience partnership, and we exercise internally in terms of an incident management team. But, the response that was required, particularly on the 27th of December, showed, particularly when that was during a holiday period, and admittedly during the winter maintenance period as well, probably was as good a test as we would have made.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, that was a pretty stupid question in hindsight. Yeah, the resilience you showed during those incidents was very good. Right, thanks very much.
Councillor Well, just to say, I don't think that was a stupid question at all, Councillor Harvey. Because as Director Renton outlined, when you have, if you were to design a scenario, you would have a single point of failure, and actually you have multiple failure modes engaged at the end of December there. Councillor Welch.
Thank you, Convener. Slight concern I have, and I still don't have a kind of full understanding personally around, the involvement of the various critical external agencies that particularly specifically with hazard and flood risk from the River Tay and its catchment, where we have, SEPA, a custodian of significant informative data and advice, SSE as a significant commercial operator of infrastructure which can cause changes to the river systems, and ourselves with a statutory need to, protect people and property. How those organisations formally work together and legally, where organisations' roles are defined. What, in your opinion, is the current position, and what things, in your opinion, do you think need to change? Thank you.
If I can come in, and then sort of other officers might want to. The way that nationally resilience is established within Scotland, then we have a number of category 1, category 2 responders, and and the local resilience partnership is made up of those organisations, and that's the important part of the local resilience partnership, in terms of having as many people in the right place at the right time to discuss what any weather related or whatever incident it is, because as we would do, then the local resilience partnership would stand up for any other non-weather related emergency as well. The roles of the Met Office, SEPA and SSE, and in this particular case, particularly going back, to the 8th of October incident, then SSE Renewables, which is a different part of the organisation, is the part that we really needed to speak to. At my request, following the first LRP meeting, then SSE Renewables joined the rest of those local resilience partnerships as well. And again, that's the strength of having the local resilience partnership and the collective national approach to managing incidents as well. So in terms then of the discussions that we've had since those particular incidents, then there's very strong and good discussions going on with SEPA in relation to how we deal with whether or the telemetry rather for the Tay in particular. And those links. We now also have the actual flow information, not the predicted flow information, so that we're able to get a little bit more of a heads up in terms of that as well. So I think generally, the relationships have been strong. That will always be the case that, because depending on the length of any incident, then Met Office, police and whatever, people may change at those, LRP meetings in particular, but the level and detail of the information and the questioning and the openness of those questions, remain the same, no matter who's in attendance. Does that answer your question, Councillor Welsh?
Not wholly. I guess my concern is around ultimately that it's really important that everybody clearly understands their roles and responsibilities, and specifically my sort of concern around maybe SSE and its business area of SSE Renewables. They have ultimately an important part to play, and they have a commercial element to their activities as well, and it's just to understand clearly how that all interplays as part of the bigger picture. But I'll leave it there for just now.
And if I may come back in, part of what we can provide to elected members is how that all fits together in terms of Cat 1, Cat 2 providers, and the arrangements locally and nationally that are in place for that.
Thanks. We're getting away from my nice scheme of going through the report, but I think we're on a useful theme of questioning here. So I just want to follow up then. Director Renton, I think you said that you'd invited SSE to be part of the LRP meetings, and my understanding was that after the first event in October, there was a protocol put in place for cascading the information in terms of through SSE SEPA to the Roads Maintenance Partnership, or to the council. Can I ask if that could we, first of all, Mr. Butterworth, I think you referred to the protocol earlier on. Could we take that as an action just to circulate it so that members can see what that protocol looks like? And then my next question is that protocol working? Because at the Storm Garrett event between, I think it was the 27th of December, I'm aware that one of the Highland members got in touch with council staff to alert them to a potential release of water up in Pitlochry, and that information was coming, from the ground rather than cascading through the channels. Pardon the pun. Rather than cascading through the established channels that I understood were in place with the protocol that we've been referring to.
Yeah, just in terms of that protocol, then I think just going back to the 7th and 8th of October, I think one of the concerns, or maybe the weaknesses there, was the communication or the lack of clarity between SEPA and ourselves in terms of the exchange of information around the level of the Tay high tide and also the water flow, the pace of the water. That's been the focus of our discussions in terms of clarifying how that exchange of information will be communicated, and that's a protocol I'm referring to. So we can absolutely share that with elected members, but yeah, we need absolute clarity about how that works, because that is fundamental in terms of then initiating our action plans within the Roads Maintenance Partnership and the council. But we can certainly share that information. I think again, going back to the 7th and 8th, it was SSEN were sharing information with SEPA, who was then factoring that into their model, and then was sharing it with us. And in terms of that event, that was how it should have worked. And from the discussions we've had, it worked in line with their protocols, but the protocols between us and SEPA, we can share them.
And did it work in December?
It's changed slightly now, whereas we have our own system where we can access information, whereas we were reliant very much on SEPA providing that information. So that the way the protocol works now has changed, but we're comfortable that will work well, and we've got no issues with that.
Okay, thanks. I think if we can see that, that'll help us to understand it from a point of view of knowledge, rather than sort of having something to describe to us. Sorry, I interrupted there. Councillor Robertson, you're next.
Sorry, Convener, if I could come in as well.
Sure.
So, sort of particularly, the issues round about the 27th of December, and I have now lost track of the dates, but Storm Aisha, then we were in very regular contact with SEPA. SEPA were in very regular contact with SSE Renewables, and it's those points that because particularly, with Storm Aisha, we were not clear about the snow melt and the impact that the snow melt might have over the course of the 5,000 square kilometres of the Tay catchment area, that led to making certain decisions over that. So that is part of those ongoing discussions, and particularly on the Monday morning, where we had a number of different telemetry sets of information, but the relationships were strong enough to go back and question them, get more information, and much more alertness round about that.
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener, and also thank you to you for allowing us the questions to be broader than the actual paper would indicate. Can I ask if officers are now confident that there's a robust early warning system in place that alerts the council when there are water surges coming down the Tay, to give you ample time to take necessary action to protect Perth from flooding?
It's an interesting question to answer, Councillor Robertson, and I think that we all have to understand that at any point there will be an element of human interaction with all of this, and that the speed, the timeous nature and the accuracy of the any information coming down about the Tay, The Tay, as I've said many times, is, you know, sort of an interesting river, the, you know, sort of with its 5,000 square kilometres of catchment. I think to be able to get all of that information, all of that right, all of the time will always be very difficult, particularly because of climate change and the experiences that we had over the 6th and the 8th of October, sorry, where the weather predictions were just not accurate enough because it was so hot down south that the rain, you know, sort of lingered much longer over the Perth and Kinross area and the catchment area. But we are, you know, sort of using the information that we've got. The, you know, sort of the links are stronger, as I've already said, with SEPA and with SSE renewables. So I would like to believe that we're never, you know, sort of going to face that again. And there's a clearer understanding between all of the organisations of the length of time it actually takes us to close gates and to muster staff.
Convener, if I may come back with a supplementary on that. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to be, our current system seems to be susceptible to, I don't want to use error, but human error. If the communications don't work properly, we could be in trouble. Is there any way to supplement that reliance on human feeding into the system with more electronic warning systems or digital systems?
I don't know the full details about how all of the telemetry work, but certainly, you know, sort of there are gauges and there are alarms on a large part of the Perth flood scheme. I think that, you know, sort of the important bit is that we have been operating the Perth flood scheme for more than 20 years. And that the knowledge and experience of officers is really, really, you know, sort of vital to all of that. And that's not just council officers, that I would include, you know, sort of officers from SEPA and SSE renewables within that as well. We are undertaking a review of the scheme. We're looking to see whether, you know, sort of there are elements that can be redesigned, but that will come at a cost. And obviously, if you've got a lot of water and a lot of electrical stuff or, you know, sort of high-tech stuff, then there is the opportunity for that to fail as well. So I think that we just need to take a really balanced, you know, sort of approach to what we do in future in terms of the scheme itself.
Thank you.
Councillor Shires.
Thank you. Barbara kind of answered a bit of the question at the end there. I suppose my concern, following on from the comments, the questions that Councillor Robertson asked, was we heard Mr Butterworth talking about a protocol, and then we heard Barbara talking about the staff. You know, so there's like the human element in it, and the officers move on, change. SEPA officers move on, change, and it's knowing that that protocol is there. That almost like supersedes all the people that are involved to give that reassurance of the process that will be followed. And you talked there, Barbara, about a cost to all of that. Is there the opportunity? I mean, that's obviously going to be significant and involve multi-agency. So is there support from the Scottish Government to fund that? Because obviously that's not something that we've got resource necessarily to do. So where would that all sit in that development of the protocol, or would that be completely separate?
We have had no discussions with any other agency yet, Councillor Shires, in terms of, you know, sort of what changes that we would be suggesting in relation to the scheme itself. But, you know, sort of I think that with every organisation, as you point out, there have been changes to personnel. And we will be facing some of those ourselves in the not too distant future and going on forwards as well. So I think that as part of our planning, then we just need to make sure that, you know, whatever changes we're putting in place as we go through it, because we will continue to make changes, that everyone and all the agencies are aware of that.
So we'll go back to the report. So I think we're now on 7.18 to 7.26, which is impact and recovery. Then 7.27 to 7.29, the impact on roads. Okay. So that was Storm Babette, and recognising and understand that obviously a lot of the questions that we've already asked in the previous session will, or a lot of the questions that we would ask on these sections, so would have similar answers to in the previous session. We'll move on to the 27th to the 29th October weather event, which is section 8 on page 28 of the previous paper. So first of all, 8.1 to 8.4 notifications and preparedness. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. 8.2 references that further closures were undertaken. This is the floodgates. So I'm just wondering if, there was quite a lot made of the fact that the plan said not to close the floodgates until certain things happened. But so I'm wondering if this statement, further closures were undertaken, was that done regardless of the plan? Was that done based on the experience of before, that people were looking for that reassurance to see the floodgates being closed?
Councillor Forbes, that was a risk-based assessment we took at the time based on, this was the third severe weather event in less than 3 weeks within Perth and Kinross. There was an awful lot of water in the system. There was an awful lot of water on the ground. We were taking information in from SEPA. So it was a decision based on, what the evidence that was being presented to us, and what we knew in terms of the ground conditions.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of, I had a question about the sort of lower Friarton that occurred to me about the Friarton area and the harbour area, closing the gates along there. Obviously, that affects businesses in that area, but in the previous session, we'd spoken about supplementing council staff for gate closures with local volunteers. Do we engage the businesses in helping us along there, or could we engage the businesses in helping us along there in terms of making sure that gates are closed at appropriate points as a supplement to the council's own response?
I'm going to ask Andy Brown to come in, to that. But I also wonder, because whether it would be helpful for all elected members to actually maybe have a tour of the flood scheme, because when we talk about closing a gate, it's easy to imagine that it's just quite an easy gate, but there are things to turn and things to slide into place, and I think it would be really helpful for elected members to understand how the scheme works, and not see it in action, because we would only close some of them when we needed to. But Andy, if you can come in and deal with Councillor Stewart's inquiry.
Thank you, Director Renton. Councillor Stewart, we have not engaged with local businesses in that area and asked for any specific help from them as external help goes. The health and safety aspect of things is crucial. We can't have untrained operatives, whether they be from the council or external people, going and closing floodgates. There's a risk that they might actually break some of the mechanism on the floodgates through not having the knowledge of how they go together. Some of them are actually quite complex in the way that you close them. It's not just a case of slamming one lever down and that's it all done. But the main interaction that we have with businesses is keeping them up to date on when we're closing the gates, when we're reopening the gates, and the gates are manned at times when the risk has been assessed that it's okay for business to continue, but we may have to close the gates imminently. So that's a brief resume of our interaction with the businesses down in the Lower Friarton area. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Brown. I don't think I was suggesting that we would just give them keys or whatever and let them loose on it. I think that if that was a route to go down, then an appropriate period of training would be appropriate. In terms of the tour that you were offering us, I think that would be really helpful. So we can maybe take that as an item to cover on the as an action to cover. Certainly, I saw, and I can appreciate just how much effort goes into it, because I was standing watching them. I can't remember which event it was, but watching them lower the gate in on the Queen's Bridge, and that's quite a complex operation. So totally understand that it's not something that can be done just by the flick of a switch or pushing something into place. But Mr. Butterworth, you wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just I suppose there's two aspects to the question. I think the first thing is that part of the operating manual does include a list of businesses which we will contact before we close the gates and just keep them engaged. I think that's something that we need to update. I think that was one of the things coming out of the review. I think the other thing is important, whilst we wouldn't necessarily ask residents or businesses to help us with the closure of the gates, I think one of the things that we're looking at is maybe extending the training and the role to other council staff. So in emergencies, they can support the Roads Maintenance Partnership, because I think one of the issues we found was a number of people who were on standby from the Roads Maintenance Partnership during the 7th and 8th, but there were other council staff who were on standby. So it just makes sense for us to make sure we have one big team, if you like, and make sure we've got as many resources as we can trained up to support the Roads Maintenance Partnership. So that's one of the things we're looking at as part of the improvement plan.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Butterworth. I think I'm right in saying that the improvement plan did talk about engaging external people, or looking at least looking at the possibility of doing it. So we can follow up on that in when we get future updates on the plan. Okay, if we're done with notifications and preparedness, we can move on to response management, section 8.5 of the report. And impact and recovery, sections 8.6 and 8.7. There's no questions on that. We'll move on to section 9 of the report, which is the findings, improvement actions and conclusions. A reminder that we did approve the improvement actions and made some additions to it at the last meeting. But if anybody's got any questions on the improvement actions, now would be the time. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I raised this the last time, and it was relating to vulnerable people and how we track them down. Would it be, what work would be involved, and what sort of cost would it be to put together something on our website where people who feel that they are in that vulnerable category could register with us, so we could call off that list and try and contact them in future events? Is that something the officers could look at and come back to us with costings on it and decide if it's something we should go ahead with?
If I may come in, and I don't know, Alan, whether you want to come in at the back of me as well, but we already have a list of vulnerable, residents through either our social work lists and our housing lists. Now there is. And then there is also the SSEN vulnerable list, which is much more a declared thing. It would be quite difficult, I think, to be able to manage, everyone who feels vulnerable, because if you're vulnerable because of a weather event, flooding, you're vulnerable because of it's too hot or whatever, but we will, so we are pulling together, all of the information that we have. We're benchmarking with across Scotland to see what other arrangements are in place. But Alan, I don't know whether you want to come in terms of how we could even begin to do what Councillor Forbes is suggesting.
I think we would have conversations on that in terms of the improvement plan, Councillor Forbes. But in terms of doing that for COVID, information governance and data protection was relaxed during COVID to allow us to do some of the things that we actually did in terms of the identification of vulnerable people at that point in time. So during business as usual in normal times, it would be very resource intensive to keep a list like that up to date. And that would be the issue. There would be ongoing staffing resources and making sure that something like that was up to date and that it was proportionate. Because as Barbara has said, it would be the definition of vulnerability depends on what the circumstances are. But it is something that we would look at, and we have discussed it in the past, obviously, following what we had during COVID, and whether we could look at doing something like that from our existing systems.
Yeah,
And
thanks
if
for that,
I'm-
both of you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
You go, Barbara.
yeah. So if I can come back in again, the local people know more about local people than sort of we do. So that's why we're very keen to sort of grow the community, grow the local. What am I trying to say? The community resilience groups, in terms of that, so that the sort of in the event of any incident, then local people will be always the people who are able to be first on the scene, to be able to pick up any issues that they might have about people they know in their own local community. It's not, and it's absolutely not about the council not being able to there to respond, but it's about the speed of the response, and to make sure that, because vulnerability can change, you could be vulnerable one day and then better the next, or vice versa, and it's local communities that know. So I would encourage all elected members to encourage their communities to consider sort of forming community resilience groups, and Hunter and Stuart Skeen are really keen to have those discussions with yourselves or local communities to expand that.
Thanks, Barbara. If it's okay, convener, can I just come back on that? I said this the last time. I've got no idea why, but I seem to be on the vulnerable list for SSEN. I just got a text message from them yesterday advising me that we're moving to yellow weather warning. So there's two things. I don't know how to get off this vulnerable list, but I'll take that up with them. They seem to have a really good list, and they seem to be really good at managing it. Is there any way we could talk to them to try and link the two together? Because we did hear at the last meeting a testimony that was read out, I think, by the clerk, from a lady who'd felt that she was vulnerable and wasn't getting any support. So I'm quite keen that we try and explore this, even if we take it as an action to go away and look at it and come back with a couple of loose proposals. That would be really useful.
Mr. Skeen.
Hi there, Councillor Forbes. Just to give a little bit further depth of information, if I could, the SSEN list, as Director Renton's already alluded to, is a voluntary thing where people sign up themselves. Going back to Storm Arwen, which was a little while ago during COVID, we had a list of vulnerable people provided by SSEN. The result of that, however, it was relatively unmanageable, because a lot of the people who were declared as being vulnerable were actually not vulnerable, or we wouldn't certainly class them as being vulnerable. In reality, in the response situation that's worked certainly through the weather events in October and December, our Health and Social Care Partnership are aware of clients that they have in their area. Certainly during the flooding event in Invergowrie, we were aware of the vulnerable people that were cut off by the floodwater. And as a result of that, when evacuations were happening to these properties, this information was passed on to the Coast Guard, who were able to target these properties initially, and also get carers into vulnerable people who couldn't leave their property. So it did work very well. However, the SSEN list, or having something of that nature, is essentially like opening the floodgates, and there's no way of auditing it in regards to if somebody moves house. The people are still on that list, and sometimes there's duplications on that list also. So, the governance around such a scheme, I think, would be very difficult.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I get all of that, and you're right what you say about the SSEN list, because I'm on it and I'm not vulnerable, so I need to get myself off that. But that's a separate matter. So I think we'll probably just leave it there. But I'll maybe just pick up with you and Barbara on that off table, because I do feel quite strongly about it. Thanks.
Thanks, and I think Director Renton's indicating that that is already in the improvement plan as an area to look at. Certainly. Oh, Mr. Hope, you want to come in?
Thanks, Convener. Just to provide some level of reassurance to Councillor Forbes, I have reached out to SSEN with a view to getting an assurance that in future events we'll get access to their list of vulnerable customers, and they're in the process of making that happen for us. They tell us that they reckon by the end of this month they'll have sorted out all the GDPR issues and we'll be in a position to share in advance of any weather event that we know about their list. The pragmaticness, if that's a word, of that list is still in question, as Stuart said, but that's something that we have done.
Okay, thank you.
That's great, thank you, Hunter.
And if I could just add to what Director Renton said about the encouraging the community groups to come together. Certainly, as I've been going round my communities in, well, before, but also particularly since October, I've been encouraging the community groups and the community councils to start thinking about how they go about forming these community resilience teams, and they're definitely up for the challenge and have taken that challenge head on. A local issue, I know, but Mr. Skeen, thank you, and Director Renton, you came up to an event in Alyth where there were various agencies represented, and the community came along, and communities from other areas as well came along to see how they can respond and how they can set up these teams. And as I say, thank you to Director Renton for coming along, and Mr. Skeen particularly for your team's willingness to engage with those communities, and just to reiterate the plea to all members to go out and speak to their communities about doing that. Next question is Bailey Hearn.
Thank you very much. I just want to refer to an issue that was on the first weekend, and I'm not going to be too specific to identify the individual, but there was somebody that was on life support in their property. So not only were they possible issues with flooding, but if the power had gone off, then I would assume the life support would have gone on to a limited battery backup. And several times during the day, I had a relative come up to me and say, look, is anybody going to get an ambulance? Because a specialist support was required to move that individual had power gone off or had the place been flooded. Now, I was a bit concerned there that you said the SSEN list was voluntary, and I don't know how people go on to that, because I think the primary concern for that family would have been the loss of power more than the flooding, because the loss of power would have put it onto limited battery backup. So how do we find out that we have people in the community that have that vulnerability that may not necessarily know they've gone on the SSEN list? Or is that something the NHS do as well, if they've got somebody with that complex concerns, that they would contact SSEN?
I would have assumed that if somebody was in a home setting with that kind of equipment, that when that was installed, that there would be some backup situation, but I don't know if any officers know in detail or whether we need to come back on that answer.
I think Kenny Ogilvy's on the call, so Kenny might be able to respond to that.
Thanks, Barbara. Sorry, I was trying to raise my hand, but I don't seem to have that function. The short answer is yes. If a person's on life support, they will be flagged up on our vulnerable persons list, which is drawn in from information from allied health professionals, district nurses, and social work. I don't know, Councillor Ahern, if you want to maybe give me details of that particular situation, I can certainly look into that. But if they were on life support systems that relied on electricity, they should have been on our list and they would have been on our radar, because that is obviously one of the things that we check in the event of any weather event.
I will do that. Thanks for that comment there, because the ambulance didn't turn up. So I want to know if that was a failure in the system or that person is not registered. So I will definitely follow that up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And if I may come in, I mean, I think that, sort of in those particular instances, sort of if the family member's concerned, then, sort of that probably would be a contact directly with NHS and the Scottish Ambulance Service.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any more questions on the section of the report dealing with the improvement actions? Bailey.
Thank you very much. The question's on paragraph 9.27 under coal handling. The report notes that a request was made for Aberdeen to step up their coal handling and bring in an additional 3 people. It mentions that request was made as a result of the emergency motion agreed at the old EI, or Environment and Infrastructure Committee. The report says in a couple of places that request was made, but it doesn't say how Aberdeen replied or whether those 3 extra coal handlers were made available for any of these storm events. Do we know what their response was, please?
I think that that's part of the discussions that we're having still on an ongoing basis, sort of in terms of that. And I don't know whether Andy Brown or Alan want to come in on that particular issue.
My understanding is Aberdeen were not able to call in the additional resources. Sorry, to be clear, their additional resources are on a voluntary basis beyond their complement. So that is something that obviously takes time. Without Stuart Dahl here, or maybe Andy wants to confirm, I'm not sure what the timing issue was, but my understanding is the additional staffing resources were not in.
Okay, that's understood. I understand it's a voluntary thing. It would have been nice, I think, to have seen that stated in the report, but I'm glad we brought it out now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the improvement actions section 9 of the report? No. Okay. We won't do comments just now. We'll go on to questions on the updated improvement plan. Do you want any opportunity to introduce it, Barbara?
No, Convener, thank you. I
That's
think
fine.
that would just try to cover that in my general opening remarks.
Sorry. We're now on the full paper 7 for this meeting. So we've got an updated improvement plan at the back. Have we got any questions on the status of the actions? Bailey Hearn.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is on regarding the new action, well, the first new action on page 59, which is the review to have a clearer and better tested plan B for when something does go wrong with a piece of infrastructure. And I just wanted to pick up that word, the piece of infrastructure. I'm probably aware we probably need a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, depending on what goes on, and whether that is specific to a physical piece of infrastructure, for example, a vehicle, a lorry or a crane moving barriers, the physical barrier itself, because we've also got things like manpower, trees down, limited access, power lines down. But there's a number of other pieces of infrastructure, if you like. So I just wondered how broad that statement is, and how many, whether the plans are for, specific instances like the road's blocked, we can't go there, we can't get access, a road might be flooded. Is this piece of infrastructure wider than just a physical piece of infrastructure?
I think that would be a question for Mr. Dial, but I know he's not here. So
I'll
Mr. Butterworth.
take that. Thanks, Convener. Yeah, I think this recommendation was particularly in relation to the difficulty we had on the day closing the main gate on the North Inch, and the fact that we would have the sort of plan B at that time would have been to move the 1 ton concrete blocks to block the entrance, but we weren't able to do that because of the availability of equipment. So that's what it specifically relates to. But I think, you know, as a result of all of this, you know, we are looking at our risk and our resilience plans and what we can do in certain situations. So I think this whole review is looking at our plans and our approach to risk management with all of this. So it's a lot wider than just looking at that one piece of kit, the HIAB that lifts the blocks, etc. We are looking at other things, and you know, that's sort of throughout the improvement plan itself.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions on the improvement plan? Councillor Harvey.
Oh, sorry, it was a general question on the improvement plan. No, just pass. I'll get it at the end. Thanks.
No, carry on just now, I think.
Oh, well, okay, thanks very much, convener. Just a general question. Lessons learned is always an important factor when incidents like this happen. Would you summarise what you think the major lessons learned in regard to this would be? Thanks.
I think that the improvement plan, Councillor Harvey, you know, sort of outlines, you know, sort of the number of lessons learned within, you know, sort of this. Already picked that up, but we debrief, you know, sort of all of the time, you know, sort of from any incident. Particularly, I think for this one is how we best use the resources across ourselves and across the local resilience partnership to make sure that across Perth and Kinross we are keeping people as safe as we possibly can.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes, 2 questions.
Actually, convener, I've got a specific question on the new improvement plan, and then I'll maybe come back with a couple of general questions just about the event, if that's okay. The second one down says officers to review and put in place new minimum staffing stroke standby levels. I'm a bit confused by that. I thought one of the issues was that we just simply didn't have enough people available to close the gates in the timescale that we were meant to close them in. So I'm wondering what the new minimum staffing levels are, what's different to the current minimum staffing levels?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Forbes. I can take that question. I think the arrangements on the evening, the standby arrangements on the evening of the 7th or the 8th of October required, I think it was two or three operatives to be on standby at each of the 3 depots. So in total, it was about 7 or 8 officers should have been on standby that evening, which was the case. The difficulty is that that number of officers would just not have been sufficient to put in place or the action plan that was required at that time. I think a full closure would require something like 16 operatives to close all the gates within about 4 to 5 hours. We just simply didn't have enough people on standby at that point in time. So that recommendation is to look at, well, what is a reasonable number of operatives to have on standby at any one point in time. One solution to that would be, well, if we need 16 operatives to close all the gates and we want them to be that level of resource to be in place 365 days a year, you know, 24 hours a day, well, we need to up our standby to 16 operatives or thereabouts. Clearly, that is not something that we're going to put forward. You know, there are different solutions to this, because you know that level of standby resource to be available, as I say, 365 days a year, 24/7 would just be unaffordable. But it relates specifically that the number of guys or operatives, sorry, on standby at that time when the gates needed to be closed wouldn't have been sufficient to put the full plan in place within the 4 to 5 hours, which is the time that we aim to close them.
Thanks, Mark. So does that mean then that by June 24, in 3-4 months' time, someone from your department will be coming back to elected members to say, this is the new arrangement and this is how it's going to work and this is how it's going to be funded? Is that fair to say?
I think that is fair to say. Absolutely, yeah. That's what we're working on, but we won't be bringing a recommendation back to elected members to find X hundred thousands of pounds to find those additional resources. As I mentioned briefly earlier, we also have other council staff on standby, so there's an opportunity there potentially to train those staff to do this. You know, we need to look at what the community can do for themselves in terms of the community resilience groups, and that's not necessarily helping with the closure of the gates, but it could be other activities. I think also one of the other options is maybe to change the protocols around the gate closures. At the moment, you know, we close the South Inch gates on a yellow warning. That may be something that we extend to other gates. So we're looking at a number of options in terms of the best solution, but I don't think it would be sustainable or appropriate just to throw a load of money at this or ask council for that. So we're looking at different options, but certainly by June we will come forward with a proposal which is more robust than the current arrangements.
Thank you. Councillor Welch.
Thank you, Convener. It's a kind of wider question, really. You know, this is really sort of throwing up essentially how complex and how increasingly we're going to be faced with these situations, and really we should be looking at, I think, as the director mentioned, the river system of the Tay is in a huge catchment, and we need to sort of really be working out on a catchment basis, you know, how we're going to start to really mitigate some of these issues, because, you know, creating bigger gates, bigger walls, you know, as was shown in Brecon, is not going to work here. So I guess my question is, how are we as a council going to work collaboratively across some of the other committees, environment, infrastructure, climate change and planning, to really start, you know, really solving these problems or mitigating them actually within a catchment level? Thank you.
I think that Councillor Welsh, you pick up a really interesting point there, and it's a point that, you know, sort of I've been making on behalf of the council for at least 18 months in terms of what is the national approach to dealing with climate change and, you know, sort of particularly flash flooding and the infrastructure that we have in place to deal with that. We are taking a report to the next EI and ED committee, which is the council's or the officer response to a consultation that the Scottish Government are currently operating in relation to water, wastewater, and, you know, sort of, and that's the point that we will be making within that, you know, sort of, that this is a collective, what are Scottish Water doing in terms of their drainage systems, and what, you know, sort of, what is actually the impact of climate change and how nationally we deal with that.
Okay, thank you. Just before he also leaves for meeting, the Chief Executive would like to come in for a moment or two.
Convener, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to make a very short statement. I would like to, before leaving, just place on record my thanks to Barbara Renton and to the wider team for not just this response, but the fact that Barbara has led our response to more resilience events than she would care to remember, I'm sure, over her time in her current and a number of previous roles. We have to make the necessary adjustments as a team, as Barbara prepares to leave us in the coming months, and we will reflect on the lessons set out within the improvement plan. But just before I left and before Barbara left for another commitment today, I just wanted to place on record my thanks to her and to the wider team for everything they've done over the course of this event.
Okay, thank you. I was going to actually say thank you very much to Barbara for coming along to Scrutiny over the years, Scrutiny and Performance Committee and previously Scrutiny Committee, and always engaging in a very open way. I know that this is going to be your last meeting, as our next meeting is in April, after you'll have left Perth and Ross Council, but thank you very much for the open way that you've always engaged with the elected members' questions and suggestions. You're now free from scrutiny.
For the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I've got two unrelated but general questions. Do you want them both, or will I do one at a time?
One at a time.
Okay. The council's budget, or I guess you'd say the administration's budget last year, allocated some money to council-wide resources to be utilised more effectively to better serve residents and communities in times of severe weather during winter, flooding and storm events. Street cleaning, grounds maintenance staff deployed to assist where needed most, includes provisions for additional grit sandbags and access to plant, equipment and vehicles where necessary. I'm wondering what happened to that piece of budget and why it wasn't used during the storm.
Mr. Butterworth.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think if I'm right, it was £50,000. Is that the allocation that council was referred to? Yeah, we have bought some kit and equipment to allow us to move effectively from depot to depot in times of whether it be a weather event or simply just to support different depots or different areas around Perth and Kinross. So that money has been spent, and we have put in place actions, if you like, to help us to move resources around the area. So that's there. And I think, Jordan, particularly the events later on in October, which affected Invergary, I think, you know, that demonstrated that we moved resources from lots of areas, particularly Perth, to that area to support the sort of clean-up events. So that money has been used, and we have put in place those sorts of different ways of working, if you like.
Thank you for that, Mark. And convener, my second question is the council facing any legal action from either individuals or groups of people or any other organisation over the storm event?
There will be the usual insurance claim actions, but there has been no legal action or writs, etc., served on the council I'm aware of.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener. I wasn't on the special scrutiny committee when we discussed this previously, but I have been following it in great detail, and quite rightly the focus has been on the residents who were affected and the businesses. But I'd just like to ask a question about our staff and the kind of welfare and equipment and, you know, clothing and all the stuff that they need to be resilient themselves when they're out addressing, it seems to be on a very regular basis now. Are we confident that they are kitted out as well as they can be, that all their welfare arrangements and everything else that needs to be in place is in place, and how often is that reviewed? And do we need to consider upgrading the kind of clothing and other kit that's made available to these operatives that are out and about, particularly those who end up doing jobs that are not necessarily their normal day job, but, you know, when they come out to assist with these events?
Mr. Butterworth.
Yeah, thanks, convener. This is an issue which regularly comes up, and I've had operatives approach me directly on occasion, and I know there was a couple of issues raised during the event, and I can absolutely assure elected members that the staff are given all the protective clothing, the equipment that they need. Absolutely. We have regular meetings which involve staff and unions in terms of health and safety meetings, where people, operatives and the trade unions, have got the opportunity to raise any concern. So absolutely no concern. I haven't got any concern around that. But if elected members have got any particular specific examples, or, you know, I'm happy to look into them. But I'm certain that we have the arrangements in place to adequately protect our staff. Absolutely.
Yeah, just to clarify, it's not something that's been raised specifically by any member of staff. It's just from a, you know, purely as somebody who often comes across people out doing this work. You are conscious that, you know, it's pretty grim work for a lot of them, and just that comfort that they are suitably equipped and to the best standards that we can deliver is a comfort and is only right and proper. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to go back to the improvement plan on item 5, the work with the resilience groups. Can I ask how many meetings there have been with the current resilience groups, and how many new resilience groups have been formed since this event?
Mr. Skeet.
At the moment, there's at the moment, there's 20 potential groups or semi-existing groups on the horizon. Some of these groups have been set up for one purpose, but are now looking to diversify in other areas. And other ones are at the very early stages at the moment. So we're looking at the moment to try and support these as best we can. We've attended a number of meetings recently, at evenings, weekends, etc., to try and suit people best, because quite a lot of these volunteer groups, doesn't suit them Monday to Friday when they're working. So we're quite flexible in that regard. The groups that are already established, again, there's no two groups that are the same, but we have been engaging with the ones who are wanting to engage with us and supporting them further as well. Where we need to get to, however, is to the point where we're all developing local resilience plans for each community resilience group. Some groups have them, some groups don't, so we're working on a standard template at the moment where we can help support these groups further. But it's very much at the early stages for the 20 groups that are new. Most of these have came onto the horizon since the events in October, and a lot of these are supported by the elected members as well as a lot of the community council groups.
Thank you. Councillor Shires, another question.
Sorry, just one other point, and I don't know if it would sit on this or if there's anywhere that I can squeeze it in to make it relevant, but with every one of the bad weather events that have happened in the part of Highland Perthshire that I represent, there is an ongoing issue with mobile phone coverage. And despite lots of efforts to raise this with the companies who are just very difficult to get contact with somebody who can actually answer your questions, it seems to be to do with the backup batteries that they have on the mast. So when there's a power outage, the batteries will last for so long and then they stop, and then it means that communication is very difficult, as Stuart and Hunter will know, and actually getting in touch with vulnerable people. And I guess this will be similar in other parts of Highland Perthshire too. If there's anywhere that we can add into the list of people that we seek to speak to about our resilience, if I can shoehorn that into anywhere in the improvement plan.
Thanks, Councillor Shires. It's not even the remote and rural where there are problems with phone coverage. Would officers be willing to take that on as another action on the? Mr. Hope.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Shires. Yes, that's something that we'd be happy to do. We'd happy to try and make contact with the phone providers and perhaps suggest a way forward that would help them, and that perhaps local people in the community resilience groups might have the opportunity to train up, get access to and replace batteries should that be required. The other thing I was minded to say just in your previous question was that level of preparedness or being tooled up that we provide for our own staff, we'd be looking for that sort of same level of equipment for the community resilience groups as well. And in our engagement with community resilience groups, we've asked them to make an application to the monies that council have made available to support community resilience groups, to make sure they do have the appropriate clothing, they do have the appropriate communications, etc., etc.
Okay, thank you. If there's no more questions on the report or the other report, no more general questions, we'll come to comments. Then, first of all, is Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, Convener. Well, I'd like for us all to remember that this was a serious event, and it's going on continually, not just for Perth, but for the whole of Perth and Kinross and for Scotland. Going around all the various community council meetings, what is evident is that a lot of these people throughout the country and throughout our county are getting flooded. I think personally myself, speaking to farmers, etc., over the years, I think we've got to look a wee bit what Councillor Welsh was saying, that all our drainage system, our rivers, etc., are all now clogged. Now, I know we haven't got to answer this, but I think it's a government type of thing that we have to go for. And I know we're getting a report on environmental coming to us, but I think it's very serious. I think we've got to take it serious, and I think we can help roads, we can help people by taking it serious, and we really have to investigate how we go about maintaining all these waterways, because at the moment they're overflowing, they're choked, and it's causing problems throughout our Perth and Kinross district. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? If we covered everything sufficiently in the questions and responses. Bailey.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'd like to thank all of those who were on the ground during these flood events, obviously in pretty horrible weather by the definition of it. I'd like to also thank Mr. Skeen and the group who support community groups, including the very successful one in Invergowrie that's just getting started, so thank you for that. And also thank you to officers for your candour during this process. I know it can't have been easy, the level of disclosure you've had to give throughout this, so I'm very thankful to that. To my assessment, I think we've now got the right set of actions to prevent that same set of circumstances happening again and having the same catastrophic event outcome as happened in October. However, I think we all need to take a period of waiting now, because it's the press and the public who now have to judge us on whether we've been able to adequately scrutinise ourselves across these two sessions. And I'll be keen to hear the feedback from the press and the public in due course. I do look forward to continuing to support this committee in monitoring the actions which now span many forums of the council. It's been quite a journey, and I'd like to hope that it leads to real change. And I'll close by expressing again the importance of having other agencies such as SSE, SEPA and Scottish Water come along here and answer some of our questions, hopefully in as candid a way as our own officers have. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. I think this has been a very useful exercise, but one thing I've taken from it is, and I still have concerns, are about the number of agencies involved in the protection of Perth and its citizens from incidents like this. The more people that are involved in something, feeding into it, the more likely things are to go wrong. So I think that's my main concern, that I hope this never happens again, and I'm sure we'll do our very, very best to stop that. But the fact that there are so many people feeding into the system, feeding in information, all relying on one another, is, I see, quite a weakness in the whole setup. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else with a comment? Okay, well then I will add my thanks to officers for coming along and for answering our questions and for providing the updates, providing all of the information that went into compiling the original report, and for doing the for the activities that are going on to meet the improvement plan. It's recommended, I'll turn to the recommendations. Sorry, and I think we should also say, as the Vice Convener did, thank you very much to all of the council staff and the associated staff who worked during those difficult, extremely difficult conditions, and continue to work as these events recur in Perth and Kinross. If we move on to the recommendations of the report, it's recommended that the committee consider the findings of this review into the council's preparedness response and the recovery activity during each of the 3 October weather events. And so we have done that, and we consider the updated improvement actions identified within the report and make recommendations for any further areas of improvement. And I think the further area of improvement that we identified was the action to contact the telephone companies about the mobile coverage. So if the committee's agreed, we can add that into the action plan. Okay. No other comments on the report. Can we agree the report? Thank you very much. We will now take 5 minutes before we move on to the last 2 items on the agenda. So if we can go into recess until 20 past. Thank you for that short recess. We were discussing the extreme weather events, and if anybody's looked outside, there's an extreme weather event. Yeah, it's really windy and rainy outside at the moment. We'll move now on to item 7 on the agenda. Oh no, sorry. We will now move on to item 6 on the agenda, which is draft corporate delivery and improvement plan for 24-25. The Vice Convener is going to lead the discussion on this item on the agenda.
Thank you very much. So yeah, we're back to item 6 here. So I'll duly hand over to Claire Mailer, who I believe is going to introduce our report today. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. The report before you today is the draft corporate delivery and improvement plan for 24-25, or the CDIP as we are now referring to it. This is a slightly updated version than the one that was brought to Council in October, with additional information on benchmarking information where that has been made available. There remain some improvement activities within the draft action plan that do not have benchmarking data, but where these exist, they have been explained within the document. They largely relate to where there are new strategies or programmes in development, and when these strategies are progressed, we will establish the necessary measures and demonstrate how we will deliver on the planned outcomes that have been identified. The document, I must stress, remains a draft ahead of budget decisions at the end of February, and as agreed at Council, we've brought the report here today for scrutiny of the targets and improvement actions, and any recommendations from this committee will be considered and presented to Council when we return with the final version of the CDIP before recess. I'm happy to take any questions, and I suppose more importantly to hear any of your comments and your feedback for us to take forward. I also have on the line Louisa Dott, Lisa Potter's here in the chamber, and Greg Boland is here in his new capacity under his new strategic leadership role of strategic lead for planning and performance, strategic planning and performance. So we are available. There are some officers from services here that may be able to ask the more sort of detailed questions, but as you will see online, there are a number of officers that have left the chamber in readiness for the next meeting, so we'll do our best to answer queries that you've got.
Thank you. I remember that this one, when it came to Council, we were a little bit pushed for time, so please don't be shy in your questions today. It's a really important thing. It's really good we establish the right baselines on the right topics, so I'll hand over to the committee for any questions. In the absence of questions being intimated, I'll fill the time by covering. Oh, we have Councillor Forbes with a question. Please go ahead, Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, sorry, Convener. I accidentally shut my laptop down, so it took me a little bit to get going. In the appendix, I'm specifically on page 31, but my question's kind of general and you'd probably apply to most of them. Promote what our city and towns have to offer to businesses, investors and tourists, and it goes along to baseline data. This is the specific that I don't really understand. Direct tourism expenditure 463 million, economic impact of tourism 646,000. Could someone explain to me what those figures mean?
I'm not sure if I've got anybody online to answer the question, and if not, Louisa, are you able to make any comment on this? And if we need to, then Councillor Forbes will get back to you with a detailed answer.
Claire, I would have to go back and speak to the economic colleagues to find the answer to that.
Okay, so it sounds like they're going to get back to you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Shire has a question.
Sorry, I'm struggling to find the section in the report where it actually references, but it was regarding the cost of day toolkit and how wide, I can't find it in the report anywhere, and how widely it's being used across schools. And I had a wider question, which was, I see Sheena's come in to say she can answer it, which was about how benchmarking is built into this and comparator local authorities, etc., how that is built into the, if it kind of sits behind the baseline data that's referred to in the report, or how that fits in. The cost of the day, cost of the school day toolkit, is Sheena able to answer that?
Yes, I can pick that question up. Councillor Shires, all schools are using the cost of the school day toolkit, and in fact as recently as Tuesday of last week we had a session on that for all head teachers at the head teacher development day, so that's something that all schools are using. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions?
Can I just come in response to the benchmarking question? So you're obviously aware sort of more generally that we've got the local benchmarking, local government benchmarking framework. All officers across the organisation and indeed the performance team use that to do sort of comparisons and that kind of information. The local government benchmarking information, but more widely benchmarking information that each service will sort of look at within their own sort of professional field is extremely useful in terms of identifying where we sit nationally, but indeed any opportunities for any particular initiatives or improvements that might be useful for us to adopt here locally. So there's a good mark of sort of different benchmarking groups that officers attend across the organisation relevant to their own professional area. So I suppose it's maybe showing my lack of understanding of in the previous papers that we used to see at service committees, there would be reference in those, wouldn't there, to the benchmarking, comparators, etc., but they're not in this. No, this is the Corporate Delivery Improvement Plan. So this is the improvement plan. That information will be held within the annual performance report. So please rest assured that that will continue to be. So this is actually the improvement plan for the year ahead for next year. All benchmarking information for comparison, we will include that and continue to do so, within the annual performance report, but also online in terms of our wider local government benchmarking data. So yeah. This is very much our sort of local baseline data that we've got within here.
Thank you. Bailey Ahern next.
Thank you very much. And in view of what you've just said about the data's in a different reports, mine was about the increase in uptake of the national entitlement card for free bus travel on page 23. And it says a 5% increase in the uptake, but it doesn't actually give figures. I'm supposing this is just a narrative and the details will actually be in a report somewhere else, because I was quite interested to say that there's a 5% increase and it's 12,257, but how does that actually fit in? What percentage of under 22 does that actually refer to?
Louisa, I don't know if you've got the detail on that particular one, but Councillor Hearn, you are right that information would be embedded within the report. In fact, Louisa has said that is one of the figures in my introduction. I mentioned there's some figures that we're still seeking in terms of benchmarking, and that's one that we're still pulling out.
Okay, are you content with that, Bailey Ahern? Are we good?
Yeah, I am. I'm quite content that this is just an overview of things, and greater detail will be in other reports. That's fine.
Convener Stewart.
Thanks. It's maybe just more of an observation than a question, but in terms of the baseline data on page 47 of the papers or page 29 of the CDIP, the baseline data for the number of community asset transfers is exactly the same as the baseline data for the increase in community groups applying for community asset opportunities. And I suspect that the actual number of community asset transfers would be, the baseline would be much lower than the number of groups applying. So it might just need correcting.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that, and absolutely. And I mean, you're obviously aware in terms of community asset transfer, that is one area of focus that we've much discussed in terms of going forward into next year.
Great, thank you. In the absence of further questions, I've got a few points to run through myself, if I may. So starting with page 24, the one about those experiencing and at risk of poverty. The how do we know if we've been successful there suggests that we would measure our success based on the number of established cash first partnerships. I wonder whether it might be better to measure that on the output, as in the number of people helped by a cash first partnership, because we could potentially run around and be very busy creating more partnerships, but if those partnerships don't help many of our citizens, it's not useful work output. What do the relevant officers think about the idea of recasting this instead towards monitoring how many individuals are helped by cash first partnership? Thank you.
Thank you, Bailey. I think that's a very helpful suggestion, and I think the question we often ask in terms of the impact of our work, what has the reach and impact been? And I think that's, the final outcome. So I think that's a very helpful suggestion that we will take on board and factor into the final version.
Great, thank you. That's appreciated. Again, in the absence of further questions, I'll jump in. On page 25, we're talking here about the decarbonisation of the fleet. It mentions that the goal for the second on that page 25 is written in the report as it will be measured by an increase in the number of council vehicles with electric or other zero direct carbon fuel technologies. In the most recent year, we take a dip from 23 down to 17. My concern there that's not really very much of a stretch goal. We could increase the low carbon fleet size by just one vehicle to 18 and then have met that. I wonder if officers would be open to a more stretch goal there around maybe putting a percentage increase target or a numerical increase target there, please.
Yeah, again, I think, a helpful suggestion. I don't have Mark Butterworth has now left the room, but that is certainly something we will pick up with the team and again bring forward. Yeah, it will be obviously driven by sort of availability of resources.
And then one final one, which I wonder if it might just be a typo in the document, on page 26 now, so just the next page, under active travel, we've written here, to my reading, it says that we are going to achieve a 20% reduction in vehicle kilometres. I'm not sure how we can achieve a 20% reduction in vehicle kilometres unless maybe this intends to be in some specific area or some specific route. Is there an officer here who can expand on that? Because I can't imagine that we could possibly reduce vehicle kilometres across our area within a 1 year period. Although I'd love to do that. Thank you.
Louisa, are you able to comment on this, please?
I'm sure that came from the Climate Action Change Plan, but I can double check that, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could come back out with the meeting, that would be appreciated. And Councillor Forbes has come to all of your rescue. He has a question, so you don't have to listen to me. Please go ahead, Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Vice Convener. When I was reading these documents last night, I got to improvement activity, protecting and caring for our most vulnerable people. And having a very good friend who's a secondary teacher, not in person, Kinross, I want to make clear, although I suspect the problem exists everywhere. And she talks a lot about the abuse that she gets from pupils and parents. I wonder if we're doing any work on that, and if that's a target we should be looking at.
It looks like Ms Devlin would like to take that one. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Convener, and thank you, Councillor Forbes. We are undertaking a range of work with pupils and with staff, as we would routinely do, to try and ensure that our key priority of everybody being able to attend school for learning or school as their place of work is safe for them to do so. We have just reviewed the anti-bullying strategy that is applicable across all schools, and that's been done in full consultation with different groups of staff across different schools. We are looking at a range of other measures and supports for children for whom they find full-time classes difficult to attend and to engage constructively with, and so we seek to work on that. We take all incidences of any distressed and challenging behaviour or violence and aggression very seriously, and we have robust processes in place where staff are encouraged to report any such incidences as you have just mentioned, and for that to then be picked up in the first instance by staff's line manager, and then escalated if necessary and further support provided. And so we do have a range of different approaches to try and support staff and young people during their time at school and work. And happy to provide further information, Councillor Forbes, beyond this committee if that is of interest for you. Thank you.
If I may just jump in, thank you, Sheena. I'm really reassured to hear all that. But do we monitor it? Do we have targets to reduce it? And I don't need them after the meeting or anything. Just reassurance that we do actually have a target. We monitor it and we look at it.
We do monitor that, and we report that regularly to the Employee Joint Consultative Committee, and it's also discussed with all trade union colleagues as well. And the setting of targets is quite challenging, because ideally you would want it to be zero, and so therefore setting a reduction doesn't really send the right message, but that is the objective, is to reduce any such incidences in any of our schools wherever possible. That's really what the target is. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And actually, that question is very close to the one I was going to answer, so I'll make it instead the one I was going to ask. So instead, I'll make it a request. I think on that same page, on page 35, we're saying we'll measure our success by the fact that schools have a robust procedure in place to reduce bullying in line with improving relationships. I think maybe even if it can't be achieved in this iteration of the report, when we're next reviewing the CDIP, it would be great if we can have something more objective there, because we've got the subjective there. It would be great to have some more objective measures, but I do take on board fully that the optics of having to define an acceptable level of bullying incidents or incidents of violence are very difficult. So I have utmost respect for those who deal in these things. Thank you.
If I may, Vice Convener, I would say that page was something that I have discussed with our colleagues across both inclusion and primary and secondary, because it's one thing to have the strategy in place, but we do need to find some metrics of indicating the impact that the strategy has. You're absolutely right. Now, they might be qualitative rather than quantitative, and I think that that would be okay, but it is something that we have been wrestling with to find an appropriate way, because as I said, I don't really want to say it'll be a 10% reduction, or because actually we should be aiming to bring that as close to zero as possible. So it is something very pertinent, because it is something that we are currently dealing with and discussing, and we would want to include something a bit more concrete in an update. Thank you.
Okay, and then thank you for that reassurance, and back to you, Councillor Forbes, for a question.
If you've got more, Vice Convener, I'm happy to wait.
No, we've done all of mine now, so it's just you.
Okay, thank you. I'm on to page 45 in relation to housing. It's regarding affordable homes. So it's how will we know if we've been successful, maintain the 53%, 47% split across urban and rural areas? I'm not sure if that, I mean, should we be looking at more than that, or is that the way it's got to be? Is that some kind of government target that we've just got to do and that's the end of the matter? And also the next box along is 71 buybacks, empty homes. I mean, that's the baseline data. Do we have a target for improving on that for the next year?
I'll come in. I don't think Elaine is on the call again. I think she has just left, had to leave for another meeting. In terms of the split in terms of urban and rural areas, you will certainly be aware that we have fairly sort of detailed evidence in terms of housing need, of the need for additional affordable homes within many of our rural communities. So that maintaining the 53-47 has been based on that, so very much based locally rather than a sort of a national ask based on the local needs. In terms of the targets, yes, there is a target within the local housing strategy for the delivery of affordable homes, and within that does include, my understanding is the buyback target is similar. I don't know if Louisa has that information to hand, but that target sits within the wider local housing strategy that was recently signed off. Lisa, yeah. I think Louisa's going to get that information to you, but it's.
Okay, thank you. Anything additionally, Councillor Forbes?
Yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Okay, good stuff. So thank you for all the questions there, and thank you to officers for the proposals. So I understand that this paper will now come back to full council. So is this committee happy to note the report, obviously pending the things we've discussed here and that the officers have agreed to look at being reviewed ahead of it coming back to full council? Are we happy to note the report? Thank you. Thanks. So back to you, Convener.
Thank you. And we'll now move on to the last item on the agenda today, which is the Perth and Ross Health and Social Care Partnership Clinical and Care Governance Assurance Report. Who's going to introduce this one? Is it Mr. Ogilvie or Mr. Dixon?
It will be myself, Mr.
Right.
Ogilvie.
Okay. Thanks very much then. So just to note, as before, that I don't think we got this update at the last committee. So at which point we would have been doing, I think, the interim update just on the incidents. So this is the fuller report. Members will recall us, or may recall us who were there, may recall us just having a discussion on Friday, following us talking about the ALIOs. So just a reminder that this assurance report covers both health activities and the adult social work and social care activities of the Health and Social Care Partnership. The health activities are scrutinised at NHS Tayside's Care Governance Committee. So our job here is to scrutinise the adult social work, social care aspects. There are obviously a lot of teams, some work on one side, some work on the other side, and there are a lot of integrated teams too. But I'll let now Mr. Ogilvie who's our interim head of adult social work and social care, introduce the report.
Thank you. The timescale for this report, it covers between the 1st of July 2023 and the 31st of October 2023, and the level of assurance proposed by the lead officer of the Health and Social Care Partnership is reasonable assurance. I'm not going to read out the whole report, but I'll just quickly summarise. In terms of an update on exceptions previously reported, there is a risk that's been identified regarding ageing decontamination equipment at Broxden Dental Centre. There are mitigating actions in place there, and a capital equipment replacement plan being developed. And there was also a risk regarding the lack of a controlled drugs licence at the Bella Centre in Dundee. However, at the time there was no controlled drugs were required to be on the premises, and since writing this report, that licence has now been approved, so that risk has been removed. In terms of ongoing red risks, there's an ongoing risk regarding accommodation in general for a range of partnership services, and there are a number of working groups set up within the partnership and across partner organisations, including the council and NHS Tayside, to scope out resolutions to this. In terms of our mental health workforce, there are issues regarding capacity there. There are an ongoing redesign of our community mental health teams, and that includes medical professionals. There's a chronic shortage of consultants at the moment, and we are now currently heavily reliant on locums to fill vacancies there. So, like I say, the model is being scoped out. On a positive, the number of vacancies for mental health nurses has reduced significantly, so that situation is improving, but we do still have issues with vacancies for allied health professionals. There's a specific risk relating to the accommodation for our community care and treatment service, CCATs. They are currently based up at Beechgrove House, and the council has served notice to vacate there, so we're in the process of identifying alternative accommodation for CCATs. Care at home capacity is an ongoing risk. There has historically been approximately 1,500 hours per week of unmet need. At the time of this report, that had reduced to just below 1,000, so things are going in the right direction, and a number of actions have been taking place which will hopefully continue to reduce that amount of unmet need, and also a lack of occupational therapy capacity, resulting in assessment delays for occupational therapy aids and adaptations, and there's a number of vacancies there which are being recruited to. In terms of adverse events, there have been a number of adverse events during this reporting period. Most of them apply to incidents relating to slips, trips and falls. Second highest incidence rate is to do with medication, then clinically challenging behaviour, followed by violence and aggression, followed by pressure ulcers. In terms of adult social work and social care complaints, during the time frame there were 10 stage 1 complaints. 5 of them related to service provision, 3 to complaints regarding employees, 2 to policies and procedures, and 2 to policy and procedure. There were 2 stage 2 complaints. One was a disagreement with an assessment, and the second one was regarding having to pay for care. There were there was an announced there were announced visits by the Mental Welfare Commission to Gary and Tummel wards up at Murray Royal Hospital. They are our psychiatry of old age wards, and overall the inspectors were impressed by the standard of care, and stating that it was person-centred. They did, however, make a number of recommendations which are being progressed, and they also visited Leaven Ward up at Murray Royal Hospital, and said there was a good standard of risk assessments and activities, and again some recommendations for improvement which are contained in the report, and they are currently being implemented. Adult support and protection, there's a continued increase in adult support and protection concerns. However, we are still overwhelmingly meeting the target time of screening them within 24 hours, and 97% of referrals were screened within the time scale. Medication assisted treatment standards for folk with substance use issues. Again, this is a national development, and there's an update on the local implementation of that. And we have now actually been awarded green for progress in implementing that standards 1 to 5. And a range of improvement actions there contained in the report. And ongoing work, one of our key areas of focus is looking at improving the integration of between substance use services and mental health services. And in terms of workforce, still a range of issues across workforce, some of which have been mentioned before regarding medical and EHP workforce, and also our social carers as well in particular. But we do have a 3-year workforce plan, which we are currently implementing the action plan for that, which aims to mitigate the impact and address the number of vacancies across those professions. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ogilvie. Bailey Hart.
Thank you. Based on your opening statement, am I allowed to ask questions about mental health and prisoner healthcare?
Prisoner healthcare is pretty well. It's not pretty much. It is obviously a health service, and that will be covered by the Care Governance Committee. Mental health, that's an integrated service, so probably mental health would be question would be more appropriate.
Right, it's based on. I mean, it's a pretty depressing report, especially with regards to mental health. And there's a table on page 63 with red actions on there with risk ratings of 20. I don't know how that sits on a rating scale, whether it's 1 to 5, 1 to 10. But it's to do with the mental health workforce. And it's in there, it's saying about the lack of consultant psychiatrists and reliance on locums. We've had an issue with manpower and consultants for a number of years, and it's not going to change. NHS Tayside is no different to the rest of the country. The whole country has an issue with recruitment of psychiatrists. And when you look at the statement on page 67, it says there that we have an inability to recruit, and probably more important, we have an inability to retain. And I just wonder about the redesign. We're talking about redesign mental health services. That's going to have to look at the level of where diagnosis it takes part, because I don't think that even within the next 10 years we're going to have solved the consultant issue. It's just going to mean the waiting lists are going to be longer and longer for mental health issues. And when you read the statement on page 67 about ADHD, which is a long life condition, and the increase in referrals, it's all very well referring, but if there's a long waiting list, and then once somebody's referred, the NHS don't cover it. It goes to third sector organisations to support those individuals and families. So it's just a question on there about the recruitment and whether not only do we need to look at the redesign of services, but we need to look at the redesign of where the level of diagnosis takes place.
Yes, I mean, essentially, we're tackling this on a number of fronts, including all the points that you raised there. Yeah, nationally, there's a chronic shortage of consultants. We are aiming to make Perth and Kinross, as good a place to work as possible, an attractive place to work as possible. But in terms of the redesign, what we're doing is we're looking at alternative roles such as advanced nurse practitioners, and looking at advanced nurse practitioners taking on some of the lower end roles that that consultants traditionally have undertaken, to allow the consultants that we do have to focus on the more complex areas. So there is a big issue in terms of the advanced nurse practitioner role. That is one we already have advanced nurse practitioners in place. We have a number of people who are interested in training to be advanced nurse practitioners, but obviously that takes time. But again, in terms of the future model, we are looking at enhancing and making the most of that advanced nurse practitioner role. And there's a wider mental health redesign, as you know, going on across Tayside, but locally as well. We talked about the redesign of the community mental health teams. What we're also looking at is developing a primary care mental health service. And the community mental health teams will focus more on the people with sort of the higher end, more complex, severe and enduring, whereas the primary care mental health service will be more support, focus on support for people with mild and moderate diagnosis or issues. And again, that will then enable the community mental health teams to focus more on people with higher level issues. And, you know, that's not necessarily about spending a lot more money. It's about making better use of the resources and services that we currently have and just making them joined up and more coordinated. And that goes across the statutory and the third sector. You mentioned ADHD. We have a particular issue in terms of the backlog of people awaiting diagnosis there. And we think we have identified money that we can put towards a dedicated post to try and address that. But again, it is a nursing post rather than a consultant post.
Thank you. I hope that nursing post is going to be able to do diagnosis. I do know in CALMS it's different in adult services, but I look forward to seeing how that gets rid of the waiting list. But we need to look at the support afterwards, because currently, certainly in CALMS services, they're diagnosed and then the follow-up is reliant on the third sector with no support at all. And it's not just getting these people through the diagnosis stage, it's supporting the individuals and the families afterwards, which at the moment is not being done very well by the NHS, if at all.
Thank you. Vice Convener.
Thank you. My question is again one that relates to recruitment. On page 65 of the overall document pack, we've got adult social care, adult social work and social care risk number 1, lack of care at home capacity, especially around rural P&K. The report discusses the challenges of recruitment and the fact that you're working on looking at overseas recruitment as well. Just a question from a place of naivety, really. The posts that are in discussion here, do they require a particular qualification or previous experience, or are they ones that any person can apply to? Thank you.
Any person can apply. I mean, we prefer people to come with experience, but no, people can apply without experience, without qualifications, and we will provide the appropriate training.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. My question is very similar to that of Bailey Bailey's. I had a constituent recently whose wife was terminally ill, and we were completely unable to provide him with a care package for her, which shows the pressure that the service is under. Your closing remarks, Mr. Ogilvie, you referred to that you've got a plan in place to try and address the provision of more staff and holding on to the staff we've got. Can you say a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, in terms of recruitment, we are recruiting domestically, and we have recently provided money for a part-time post in our communications team, just to make sure we're getting the adverts out there. They are appropriately worded to get as much information as possible, maximising the use of social media, and just emphasising that the fact that social care is a career. I mean, it's hard work. And we are, or we have certainly increased the financial reward in recent years. But we just want to try and make clear, what the rewards are. It can be a very rewarding job, and there is a career progression there now as well. If you go in as a frontline carer, we now have senior carers, and you then can potentially go into the assessing side, unqualified social work assistant, and we provide training as well for folk to get their social work qualifications. We have got people who have started off in the caring role and are now professional social workers or team leaders, etc. So it's getting that message across that it is a career and it is a rewarding job, albeit a challenging job. And we are looking at the international recruitment as well. We have an agency identified now looking at recruiting people from the Philippines. And the plan is to get the first cohort of people from the Philippines over end of February, start of March. So once we've got that pathway fine-tuned as well, that potentially gives us access to a wider labour supply as well. But like I say, we are still focusing very much on domestic recruitment as well, and we've got links with the University of Highlands and Islands and the schools, etc., to try and stimulate interest with the young people. I mean, in terms of end-of-life care, we do obviously have to prioritise our requests, and anybody who's end-of-life, they would be treated as priority. It's unfortunate you have the example there, but we do certainly try and provide packages for people at end-of-life as quickly as possible. Just to give you an update, I mentioned it's 1,000 hours of unmet need at the time that this report was written. This is obviously a historical report. We're now sitting at just under 700. So that's from a starting point of it was consistently 1,500, certainly through the pandemic. So we have half that. And historically, once we've got down to sort of the 300-400 hours of unmet need, that's when there's been enough sort of lubrication, so to speak, or capacity in the system for the system to flow. So we are able to get folk out of hospitals without, undue delays, and support people in the community, hopefully before carers get too stressed, and we're able to prioritise people who are end of life, etc. So we certainly got the recruitment side of things domestically, internationally, and we're also looking at trying to improve the efficiency of the services as well. We've just recently got an IT system called Pinpoint, which we're now able to map our unmet need on, because we have 12 option 3, as we call them, independent providers who operate across Perth and Kinross, and then we've got our internal services as well, and then there's option 2 provider on top of that. So it's just trying to work out, this will be able to plot on a GIS map of Perth and Kinross where the unmet need is, so people can pick that up, hopefully round about the sort of runs and areas that they're already providing care in. And the next step is to get all the provision from all the providers onto the GIS map, so we can see exactly what is going on. And then that means we can, any new requirement that comes on, it goes into areas where people are already working, and that then cuts down travel time. And obviously with a large geographical area of Perth and Kinross, at the moment we've got different providers doing an awful lot of travelling. So, we can increase the face-to-face client contact time by better coordination through that side of things. And, just trying to get people focused into sub-locality areas. So you maybe get 2 or 3 providers, and they will focus just on the sort of Blairgowrie area, and we'll split our internal services as well into smaller teams, so they're focused in that geographical area, and that increases the face-to-face time. I think we're sitting at just sort of about 40% for internal services face-to-face time. If we can drive that up to 50%, again, that will help reduce the unmet need and get us down to that 300-400 hour figure mark of unmet need that we're needing just to make things work more effectively and improve the support for people out there.
Can I possibly ask a supplementary based on what Mr. Ogilvie said?
Carry on.
You mentioned that you're going to be hoping to bring people in from the Philippines. We had a family friend who, when she was a student in Poland, came across and worked in the summer holidays in a local care home, and she did it for a few years, and she found that valuable for her English and also a good source of income for herself. Why are we bringing people from Poland when there's a European source that we used to use?
I mean, again, we do look worldwide, but the UK government does have a list of green countries, as they're called, and in green countries we can go and actively recruit. And there are only about 3 or 4 green countries on there. It's all to do with obviously the state of the country and not taking the best talents out of that country and basically destabilising their health systems. So in terms of where we can actively recruit from, we are limited to those green countries, and that's the list that is compiled by the UK government. That said, we can accept applications from anywhere in the world. I mean, obviously our applications are online, so if people from Poland or wherever want to apply to our vacancies, we do consider we do consider them. But then obviously there is the issue of visas are needing granted as well, and there are particular challenges arising around that. And it's the challenges are increasing in the last couple of months, but we're looking at trying to resolve that.
Your advice to young Europeans wanting to work in the care sector in Britain is to move to the Philippines first. and they've got a good chance of getting in. Thanks. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but don't say a word. But that's what I'm reading into that.
That's what I would say to anybody anywhere in the world is apply online. We can't actively recruit in countries that are on the green list, but we
I
accept
understand that.
applications from
Thank you.
elsewhere. So
What
yeah,
you've said
don't
has
need to
been
move
very
the
helpful.
vacancy. They just need to get an application in, and we'll have a look at it.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Can we move on quickly to Councillor Massey's question, please?
Thank you, convener. Kenny, I'm on Appendix 2, page 91, clinical and care governance arrangements. I'm pleased to see that the Perth and Kinross Care and Professional Governance Forum has now resumed and is being tested in one of our localities. Can you tell me a bit about that and how's it going and what data are you been able to glean from the tested area?
Sorry. Which bullet point are you referring to in particular? Sorry.
So Appendix 2 on page 91 of our pack, clinical and care governance arrangements.
Clinical and care governance. Yeah, I mean, the care and professional governance covers the whole of Perth and Kinross, and that meets fortnightly. And then sitting underneath that, we have locality governance groups, North, South and Perth City. And then on top of that, we have a number of professional governance groups that meet regularly. For example, we have recently established a mental health governance group, and that focuses on mental health services, and that refers to the wider mental health family, which includes substance use, learning disabilities and autism, and that covers the whole of Perth and Kinross. And we also have professional meetings for social work, AHPs and nurses, and again they look at governance arrangements relating to those specific professions, and they then all feed into the Care and Professional Governance Forum, and they basically use a range of information. At the lower level groups, it's down to sort of team based to look at the number of vacancies in the group, waiting lists, etc., any specific issues or hotspots that need addressed. They try and address whatever they can at their locality or professional level, and then they escalate as required up the Care and Professional Governance Forum. And at the actual Care and Professional Governance Forum, we use information that's escalated. We also have services which report on an annual basis. We have services that provide exception reports on a rotating basis. So every couple of meetings, they'll provide an exception report. And then we also look at any learning reviews, any learning that's required, and we help any learning identified, any issues identified, and then we share that learning. We look at complaints and monitor any trends and any learning that comes in from complaints as well, and obviously do the risk monitoring in terms of any adverse events, and monitor the operational the operational risk register.
Okay. Thanks. If there's no more questions, then we are asked to provide our view on the level of assurance that this report provides, and therefore the level of assurance regarding clinical and care governance within the partnership. The suggested level of assurance is reasonable. Are we content to accept that? Do we have any other comments? Thank you very much then. That concludes the last item on the agenda today. Thank you very much to officers for their attendance and to elected members for their participation. The meeting is adjourned.